childhood vaccines. This call is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. I'd now like to turn over the meeting to the Vice Chair, Mr. John Howey.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Thank you all for being here today. I've been asked to step in on behalf of Dr. Meisner until he can join us, so this is the first time I've ever done this, so y'all please bear with me. Annie, I guess the first thing we need to do is ask for public comment on the agenda items.
So John, this is Tamara. So yes, this is the time to request public comment on agenda items. And then Cody is calling in, so you'll be off the hook in a little while, but can you hang in there with us for now?
I'm here, I'm hanging.
Okay.
So do we want to go ahead and ask for public comment, or do we want to wait for Dr. Meisner?
No, we can request open the line up for public comments to the operator.
Let's do it. That sounds great.
Thank you. And as a reminder, if you'd like to make a comment, please press *1 and record your name clearly. Once again, to make a comment, please press star followed by number 1. Our first comment comes from Teresa Rangam. Your line is open.
Good morning. Can everyone hear okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Hello?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Teresa Rangam. I'm the Executive Director for the National Vaccine Information Center. And this morning I would like to direct my comments to the VIS agenda item and just raise a few concerns that the ACCV may not be aware of. MVIC is a consulting organization that consults with the CDC under the 1986 Act, as does the ACCV. And our concerns around the VIS in general would be that, number one, consulting organizations haven't met on many VIS items that the ACCV has been consulted on. It's been well over a year, and we usually only consult for an hour or hour and a half. So the list of VISs that we have to go through is getting long, and I'm concerned that we haven't met. The other item, just to bring awareness to, is the length. It's an arbitrary length that the VIS is given. It's 1 page front and back. Under the law, there is nothing that says it has to be that length. It used to be quite a bit more informative and quite a bit longer. And the reasoning on making it that short has been from the CDC saying that that's just what their SMEs are telling them to do. However, there are 2 federal reports that this commission has previously been presented on before this ACCV commission, just detailing that people want information about vaccines and their risks, and that having more detailed information is what they want, and it would not detour their vaccine decisions. And those were in the Banyan and Alteram reports of 2009 and 2010. So I would really encourage you all to look at the length in that aspect, since you oversee vaccine injuries, and this commission has previously expressed concerns around getting that sort of information out to the public. I would also encourage hyperlinks within the VIS that aren't currently there. Many people access the VIS digitally, and so where a hyperlink could be put into the digital version to help consumers find information, I think that would be wonderful. In terms of promotion and awareness, one of the things the reports I just mentioned brought up is that it's usually on healthcare providers to hand out information and talk to consumers. However, these reports that Banyan and Alteram put out noted that doctors are hesitant to hand these out, and or there's no discussion when they do. I think there needs to be other mechanisms to get out vaccine risk information outside of just hoping somebody finds your website, or that the doctor is handing it out and actually pursuing a discussion. I would also encourage why Vaccinate in Section 1 used to be more about the disease, to say why vaccinate is more of a marketing promotion. The VIS was meant to be an informative statement. It wasn't meant to market vaccines. And then I've noted a big change in Section 3. It used to be titled, who should not get vaccinated or who should not receive the vaccine, and now it is, talk to your healthcare provider. I don't think that wording is appropriate. There needs to be a list of who should not be getting the vaccine, who's more at risk for being harmed by the vaccine where that's known. So I would really encourage closely looking at maybe previous VISs that were put out prior to the amendment to the law in 1993. They were much more informative, and it was the intent of the original act to provide much more information to consumers, and there's nothing preventing, under the current law, more information appearing on there that allows for educated decision making. And with that, I will close my comment on this agenda item. Thank you so much.
We have no further comments at this time.
Have we got Dr. Meisner, or do I need to keep moving forward?
Operator, has Cody Meisner joined us yet?
One moment.
Yes,
Oh,
operator.
Cody, you're there? Okay.
Yes, I'm here.
Yay! Okay, so we can keep moving along then.
I've been on the phone for probably half an hour.
Oh, you're breaking up.
Yeah, this is Cody Meisner. Can anyone hear me?
Okay.
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, I can't tell you how frustrated I am. I've been on this call for 30 minutes, and I just haven't been able to talk. So I apologize for my tardiness, but I have been here. And for at least for much of it, I've been trying to dial in. So was that Karen Kane who was just speaking that I heard the end of her comments?
That was Teresa Wrangham.
Oh,
It
Teresa.
was a public comment period on the agenda items.
Okay. Because we haven't gotten to the vaccine information sheets yet, right?
No. But that was the public comments on the agenda items. So now we can move on to the approval of the September meeting minutes.
Okay. Thanks very much. And that's Annie?
Yes, sorry.
Yes. Hi, Annie. Okay.
Hello.
Again, I apologize for not getting in on time. So, and John, I heard that you're there. And have you done the roll call?
No, sir.
So the next step, Annie, is we're done with the public comment, and the next step is to approve the September 2019 minutes. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yep. So I've read them over pretty carefully, and I think they're excellent. You've done, I guess Tamara and Annie have put those together. They're very well done, and I found no changes that I would like to suggest. Does anyone else have comments about the September minutes?
Hi, Cody. This is Kathy Gaffney. I have no further comments as well.
Thank you very much, Kathy. And John, are you okay?
Yeah, I have no comments. Thank you.
Okay. And Dino, are you on board?
I'm on board.
Yep. And is Tina here? Okay. So, and we have a quorum, Annie, to approve the minutes?
Yeah, Karen Kane's on the line.
Yes, I approve.
Okay. So can I have a motion then to, in regard to the September minutes?
So moved. Approval.
Second. Okay. All right, so then I guess we can, shall we, Annie, we'll move on to...
No, Cody, sorry to interrupt. We just need a all in favor.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Yep. Any, all in favor?
Yes.
Aye.
Yes.
Okay. Any nays? Okay, I think then that's approved, Annie, and we can move on to the next session. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yep. Okay, and I think we're really privileged to have the Chief Special Master, Brian Corcoran, who is going to talk to us now. I regret that I'm not there to meet you and that we're not all in person, but I very much appreciate the time you're taking this morning to talk with us. I believe you've been the Chief Special Master for 2 years. And
2 months.
2 months. Oh, okay. Well, so you can see that several of us are learning our way forward here. And but thank you very much for presenting to us today. I'm sincerely looking forward to your comments. So why don't you take it away?
Sure. Thank you very much, Dr. Meissner, and thanks to everyone. I am calling in remotely as well. I would very much like to come to Rockville for the next ACCV meeting and meet those in person who appear there. But I feel like since I became the chief, I spend all my time, instead of deciding cases, I'm in meetings. And I have a meeting this morning here at the court that I have to attend. So this is the best way I could appear as a disembodied voice. So we'll make that work as well as possible. So
Understood.
Said, a moment ago, I was appointed chief beginning October 1st. I replaced Beth Dorsey, who was a wonderful and very productive chief here at OSM for several years. She's still a special master, and so we continue to benefit from her wisdom and input. But now I have a responsibility for making things, sort of making the trains run here at OSM and looking at the big picture as much as deciding cases, which I also still do. And I'm going to speak a little bit about some initiatives that we have undertook over the past year that I have been involved in. I should also add, I've been a special master here for 6 years myself, so I don't come to that job new at all. So as everybody is probably familiar, either just from their knowledge of what we do in the vaccine program or from prior presentations, we have a lot of cases. A lot of open cases. Since 2012, we have had a dramatic uptick in filings. And it's very difficult for the existing 8 special masters to resolve the cases as quickly as they should be resolved. And it's a constant issue and a disappointment and a worry on our part, because we don't want people who have claims before the program not to get resolution. The process itself can be slowed simply by, the appellate process that's built in. But at a minimum, we ought to be able to get speedy resolution of cases brought before us, and that the number of cases that are filed are preventing that. And so we have been creatively thinking, what can we do to move things along? And we have a lot of different things that we've tried. Some of you may know about the Special Processing Unit, or SPU, which is a sort of a way for us to identify cases early that we think are likely to settle and to get them resolved. But, because of the flood of cases, SPU has almost become, in my opinion, like a secondary part of OSM that's equivalent to it. So while I have plans to try to speed SPU up, in the past year we've been wondering on our own what could we do about the flood of cases and the filings. So to that end, a year ago, the Chief Special Master, Beth Dorsey, convened a task force. And the members of that task force included some folks here at OSM, including myself and Jocelyn McIntosh here sitting with me. It also included representatives of the petitioner's bar. And we sort of chose what we deemed the 5 firms that have the most claims in the program for whatever reason. People who, firms that have active vaccine practices and some that are newer but do a lot of servo work. So they suddenly, because servo claims are a huge portion of the uptick in filings, it made sense to have them on. We also had a number of representatives from the Department of Justice. Captain Reeves, who I believe is on the call, was part of this task force. And we kind of were brainstorming, what can we do to increase the speed with which we look at cases? And how can we do this faster? We went back and forth. We ultimately came up with 2 initiatives that are now underway. I will say they're both pilots, meaning they're subject to revision and to evaluation of how well they're working. Are they working as we predicted? And we are going to take the feedback we get from having them and modify them. But I want to outline to you what they are so you understand it. And again, I'll reiterate, these are the result of a lot of different stakeholders in the vaccine program. So it wasn't just our mandate to the litigants that this is what you got to do. We wanted input from everybody, we got it, and we came up with something that everyone agreed to. So first, I want to talk about what we call the pre-assignment review, or PAR, which has been underway for a couple of months already. So one of the points that was raised in the course of our task force discussion, I think the Department of Justice was smart to raise this, and it was their idea, so I'll give them credit for it, was, because HHS has a backlog in reviewing claims that are filed, and because it's important to get HHS's input, certainly their input on a claim, whether it's compensable, is critical if a case is going to settle. Even if everybody thinks this case should settle, it's clearly, we can all on our end say it meets all the requirements, like it's a flu GBS case, it fits the table, but until they say, yes, that's right, we're a little bit hamstrung. So DOJ pointed out that a lot of times when cases are filed, against what the Act says, they do not come in with all the records that they're supposed to come in with. And as a result, we spend a lot of time early on in a case, and it can multiply to months, trying to get the petitioner to get the record. The petitioner says, oh, I can't get them. You go back and forth. It slows the case down, and then we then go into the backlog, which slows it down even further. So what we now are doing is new cases that are filed are not immediately assigned to a special master or to SPU. Instead, what we are doing is we have a sort of little group here at OSM that is responsible for looking at the filing, looking at the records that have been filed, and evaluating their completion, and then working with the parties to determine whether they're complete or not. Now, I should say that I, as the chief, I'm sort of technically the person to whom the cases are assigned. So it's not that they're assigned to nobody, but they don't really go to a decision maker until they get out of PAR. And in the course of PAR, we're also looking for red flags. Does the case assert a vaccine that's not a covered vaccine? Is it an autism claim that we're going to have serious doubts about its viability? What are potential issues? We look for that. And then we try to get sort of almost a certification, for what it's worth, that the claim is ready to go forward, and now we can shoot it out of PAR and it can be assigned. And I have been so far pretty pleased with how it's working. Things have been coming out of PAR somewhat quickly, especially cases that are appropriate for SPU. And I think it's going to help train, petitioners, bar folks especially, about what they need to do, because they should have an interest in moving cases, and I think they do. They will know when a case goes into PAR now, here's what you got to file the case with. Don't file it until you have all the things you need. And then once it comes out, we can more quickly get HHS's look at it, but also we can do things with the case. We can start working on it and thinking about it, and rather than having an endless procedural limbo where we wait for all the relevant documents that are needed to look at the proof of vaccination, the medical records, things that pertain to the claim. So it's, as far as up and running, it's working quite well, and I think with some modifications, and some adjustments, we'll probably ask the task force again what they think. It's going to continue to go forward, so I'm very pleased with that. Oh, and one other thing I should add, we look in part, we're going to have a requirement soon about, starting in the new year, about certified records. That's an issue that's been raised. It's important to know that the records that are being offered are accurate and that they're not the product of revision or something like that. We do have cases frequently now where there's issues about, for example, the situs of administration of a vaccine. It's very relevant in a server claim. So we are going to have a mechanism that we can verify that the records are certified as actually the medical records pertaining to the person in question. So that's part. Now, the second initiative that we have undertaken is a little bit more inchoate. It's just finally got off the ground, and it's probably going to be subject to more adjustment, but I want to review it with you anyway and tell you what it is. And it's been called P100. My predecessor, the chief, loved a nice acronym, so we're full of acronyms on all this stuff. So P100 was sort of the direct product of the task force and the reason for the task force being convened at all. It was an answer to the question, what do we do to move cases faster and to also permit the special masters to move faster too? And one of the things we observed was that there are often cases that get filed that for a variety of reasons get a little bit stuck, but with the right push in the right place, little acupuncture or jiu-jitsu, something along those lines, we can break a log jam and the case could settle. Maybe the issue is there's a damages point that the parties are stuck on, or there's some litigated risk question that we could move the case off of. There was a sense that those cases exist. They're not in the majority, and as you'll hear, we only have 25 cases right now that are in the P100 pilot. So it's not that all cases fit this bill, but there are cases like this. So the thinking was we would have the petitioners, bar folks, and Department of Justice put their heads together and identify a tranche of cases that would be appropriate for an expedited review by a third-party neutral. And we had the parties put their heads together, come up with this list, and then they next came up with a list, a pool of neutrals. We do, I should note, already on occasion, we don't send the cases ourselves at OSM. We don't have that power, but there are situations where the parties agree that a case should be evaluated by a neutral and that it's likely to succeed. So we do that, and it often works. So we thought, it will help the special masters who are overwhelmed with their burden. As you may know, we're trying to get more special masters, and that's a legislative process. And someday that's going to happen. I dream of that day, but it's at least a year or more off, as from what I've been told, even based on some progress we're making in that front. So this was a way to get some other deciders, if you will, involved in the process of looking at claims. The parties came up with a list of neutrals that they agreed were likely to be effective. Some of these neutrals were new to the program, so there was a training held in the late summer, early fall. And then we ordered that the cases that were going into the pilot would go into this process to be evaluated/mediated, non-binding. That was a critical aspect of it. I mean, we can't require the parties to submit to a binding process. And then we set a time limit. We said it's got to be done by the end of this year. And off they've gone, and the mediations are underway. There are, I would say, roughly, we're about 50% of the way through. I think I know there's a mediation going on today somewhere in D.C. There's more coming up. And I believe almost all of them will be completed before Christmas. And then we're going to look at what comes out and then evaluate, does this work? Do we get more resolutions or not? Do the parties agree it was worth the time and expense? I should note that the neutrals cost is sort of shared between the Department of Justice and the petitioner's bar, and then the petitioners can seek reimbursement of that as a litigation cost in the vaccine program. And we've always paid neutrals before when they have provided this service. Although, again, it's not been something that has been the rule. It's been the exception more than the rule. So we're waiting to see what happens in the result of P100. I have heard anecdotally good and bad. I'm not sure, nothing specific yet, but I am eager to see what happens and then evaluate if this is something that is worth pursuing going forward. So that is what we are doing on that front, and then we will probably reconvene the task force sometime in the new year to talk about results, lessons learned, and whether everyone agrees it was effective or not. The only other thing I'll add that I'm going to be doing as the new chief, and I'm going to start rolling it out in the new year. The chief special master is sort of tasked with oversight of the SPU. All SPU cases are assigned to me as chief, and I am very much interested in tightening the SPU process because I haven't liked, and I don't think it's anyone's fault, it's just the nature of what we do, but SPU has become its own sort of side court, if you will, that's heavily servo-oriented, but, for reasons you can understand. And the purpose of SPU moving along and quickly trying to get cases resolved has been lost a little in the process. And I want to recenter it on moving a little bit faster. And so I am going to work very hard to do that in a lot of different ways. I'm going to impose my will on it. I'm going to get more involved. We have a group of very talented staff attorneys at our office who work on these cases and manage them with my oversight. And of course, I decide these cases, but they are responsible for the day-to-day, moving the parts. And I'm going to work with them to tighten it up and try to get cases resolved more quickly. And we'll see. I know there's a lot of different issues there. We have the interest of the petitioners in getting a fair resolution of their claim. We have the respondent's legitimate concern about defending the fund and making sure that they only concede cases that they medically accept should be. But within the gap between the two, that's where I come in, and I really think it's important to try to get cases resolved more quickly. That's why why the Office of Special Masters exists at the end of the day. That's all I have.
Well, Mr. Corcoran, thank you very much for that presentation. I have a couple of questions, but that I want to ask you. But let me open it up first to others who may have questions.
Cody, this is Dino. I have a question.
Yes, please, Dino.
Chief Special Master, thank you for the presentation. It was interesting. I have one question about the P100 program. Could you say a few words about the profile of the neutrals, like what a typical background is for the neutrals? Is there such a thing?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So in the past, we've had the neutrals by and large, with some exceptions, we've had people, and in particular one person, who was a former special master who retired, who have been these neutrals. And when the parties formulated, I should say, the pool, he was an obvious person to include because of his expertise. He decided a lot of vaccine claims before he understands them. And there was another person who was put in the pool, and I'll say their name. Gary Golkowitz is the person I'm referring to. He was the chief special master, until about 10 years ago or so. And then another special master who left OSM, Lisa Hamilton Fieldman, was also added to the pool. The rest of them are individuals that were suggested by both the Department of Justice or the Petitioner's Bar. They're JAMS folks, or they're other individuals known to have mediation background, and they were all deemed people who would be able to figure out, to the extent they didn't, what vaccine claims are all about. And I'm happy to tell you their names if that would be helpful.
No, not for me, but that does answer my question. So with the exception of the two former special masters, it's people whose experience is in mediation more so than vaccine litigation itself, but then they pick up the vaccine litigation part and apply the mediation expertise. Does that pretty much sum it up?
Yeah, there is actually one person who I understand was counsel for petitioners in some vaccine claims. So not all newbies. Ideally, yes, we would have all people who were very familiar with the program and knew it cold. And it's hard to find those kind of people in the real world because of the uniqueness of our practice and the small number of people who, A, have heard of it, let alone done anything in it. But we did, there was a training for the new folks, and one of the side benefits of P100, I think, even if it crashes and burns, is we are now going to have a bigger pool of potential neutrals that litigants can turn to when they think it's appropriate for that kind of resolution.
Yeah, that makes complete sense to me. Sounds like a good idea.
Thanks, Dino. Go ahead.
I've got a quick question. Chief Special Master Corcoran, this is John Howey. Thank you for being here today. I realize the PAR is relatively new. Have you been able to see whether or not it's having any effect on how efficiently the claims are being processed?
No. It's so new that all that's happened, I've been pleased that PAR didn't become its own thing that took a year. So I right away I was being told that cases were going into PAR and coming out, which I thought was great news. But that still, of course, leaves, the HHS backlog is something I cannot control. I get mad at it. Some days it makes me cry. Some days I roll my eyes in frustration. But I have no control over that. All I can do is try to move the cases on my end and, lean on the parties to do what they can do. I do think when cases come out of PAR, what I would predict we're going to see is there's going to be less monkeying with, well, do we need X, Y, and Z to go forward? There's going to be situations where like the DOJ points out, well, this document is necessary to analyze the claim and it isn't here yet. But I think a lot of times we're going to be able to get to the substance of the claim a lot more quickly. And that's one of the things we do on our end as sort of the inquisitors of the process, is we can look at the case and tell the parties, this is what we see, now here's what we want you to do. So if we're not talking about finding documents, we can talk about the claim itself, and that's going to be a good thing.
Okay, may I ask a question, Chief Master Corcoran? First of all, just to follow up on the earlier question from Dino, he asked about the profile of the neutrals. What's the definition of a neutral? That is, experience in arbitration is certainly critical, but it's also important that people understand the history of vaccines and just how safe they really are in almost all cases, not all, but the overwhelming. And so maybe that was part of the educational program that you mentioned, but do they have an understanding of the relative rarity of side effects and the low likelihood that a vaccine has been involved in many of these claims?
Well, that's an interesting question, and I think I'm going to have to give a big philosophical answer, but hopefully it will get to what you wanted to know. So, in the average claim that comes before the program, that's reasonably disputed in my assessment, so that there's some facts about did the vaccine cause injury X. If it's fairly disputed, 9 times out of 10, I will hear experts on both sides, both for the petitioner and the respondent. They will recite the same line, which is they will say, we agree that vaccines are largely safe. We're not here to attack vaccines. We are here because we think in this one rare case, the vaccine hurt the person. And so, generally, that's a given, I think. It's very rare that a petitioner comes in with the argument that vaccines are dangerous and this one's especially dangerous. I mean, that's not at all what is going on in the cases we resolve. The neutrals are being invoked in these cases where both sides agree, where the petitioner and the respondent jointly agree that the case might be resolvable. And really what I think, as I said, what they're doing, they're going to be looking at things like a damages dispute. How far are the parties apart on a question, and how can we move them to a point where they agree that, that the number is fair to both sides? They might look at a fact issue and say, there's evidence, for example, in SERVA cases, right, the table requires onset of the injury within 48 hours. You're really looking for somebody who says, the nurse shot the vaccine too high in my arm and it hurt immediately. And a lot of times that's disputed. So the neutral in a case like that might be sort of giving a look at the evidence and saying to the parties, you've got the following kinds of evidence. You've got statements from your friends and a statement from you, but the government's got a record that says X, and here's how I think that those pieces of evidence are going to weigh out if the special master decides it. And with an eye always towards moving them to an agreement, whatever that may be. And they're not, this is non-binding. So if one side doesn't accept the neutral's evaluation, it's not going to happen. And certainly the folks at the Department of Justice are well versed in the standards for proving liability in a vaccine claim, and they're not going to roll over if they think that the neutral is coming in from left field on the issue. So the neutrals, the role they're going to play are in cases that are appropriate, where we really think we're close to some resolution. It's usually going to be where everybody kind of agrees some monies should be paid, but how much, probably. Mm-hmm. And then hopefully the neutral is going to be able to persuade the parties of what a fair resolution would be. In a case where causation is disputed and the government feels strongly that that the mediation is not going to work and they think their position is defensible, they're not going to agree to send it to P100. They're going to say no. So I think that the question of vaccine causation and how safe, it isn't even something that should come up in the P100 process, and it barely comes up when a case is before me. The wise expert who testifies before me does not tell me that vaccines are unsafe. They talk about causation in the specific case.
Thank you. That's very interesting. Can I ask you, is there a time limit for completing a claim? If that is, if all of the paperwork isn't in after a certain period of time, is it then, what happens?
So you're talking about PAR?
Yes. I'm sorry. Yes, I'm talking about PAR.
Okay. Well, so under the Act has a provision, the Vaccine Act, that which is honored in the breach, which says that claims will be resolved in 240 days. Now, that certainly does not occur and nobody, the idea that we'll be able, that's 10 years away or longer that we would ever come back to that. And routinely what we end up doing is sending out what we call a 240-day order, which says to the parties, we're not going to resolve your claim in 240 days. Is that okay? You still want to go forward? And they say yes. But at PAR, and I don't think they've set a time limit so far in PAR on how long a case will be there, although my informal view would be it's not going to be a year, and 6 months is even too long. It needs the parties, when the claim is filed and it gets the pre-assignment review, they need to be ready, and this is parties really means petitioner because the respondent isn't producing documents. I mean, they're just identifying what's not there. The parties need to be ready to go. And I don't want cases to get mired in this, and I want them to be crisply looked at, and I want the petitioner's bar to be ready to get what they need, and I want them to file cases where they've done the work in advance. So there's, we'll see if it makes sense, and this is a task force question ultimately, which I'd want input from all of the members of the task force. We'll see if it makes sense to say this is how long things are in PAR. We don't, claims themselves, as a general rule, in the bigger sense of things, don't have time limits, other than when they start to get old, we get concerned, and we have in the past couple of years made a very concerted effort to resolve some of the most ancient claims that are still floating around the program. A lot of them are OAP, if you're familiar with that, omnibus autism proceeding. They are OAP remnants. I had 2 cases I decided in the past 2 years that were former OAP cases. One was in 2005, and I think the other one's a 2008 filing. And they went up on review, and my decision was affirmed, and now they're both in the federal circuit. And that's hopefully where almost any case like that is today. So I'm hoping the oldest cases that are still kicking around before the Office of Special Masters are 2011s or 12s or 13s, and there's probably very few of those. But the name of the game is always we're keeping an eye on how old cases are, and PAR should not increase the time it takes to file or resolve cases. If anything, we want it to decrease it.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that explanation. Are there any other questions for the Chief Special Master?
Hi, this is Karen. I have a question. When you said that you were getting good and bad responses, was that from the mediators and the neutrals and the families and the injured, or what does that mean exactly? Could you explain?
Well, typically, yeah, sure. I mean, it's very anecdotal, so I'm not going to give a lot of detail because I don't trust it yet. I need to really see what. To me, the best evidence is, did the case settle or not? But what and the information is coming would come mainly from the mediators, or maybe a little bit from bleeding out from the litigants. So it's sort of. It isn't very useful to me at this point to tell you something. People, I generally don't, I hope not to hear things from the claimants directly that are complaining about how things go, because I don't want there to be problems, and I don't want them to feel I mean, I know if people, if the claim fails, they're going to be disappointed. But I want to, of course, my prime concern is that claimants in the program get a fair look as quickly as possible. And so this is a way, P100 is a way to kind of encourage that, especially in cases, where, like I said before, the parties kind of agree that a monetary payment might be appropriate. That's a good place for a petitioner to be. But sometimes even when the Department of Justice says, yes, in consultation with HHS, we're prepared to pay something. But they may not agree with the petitioner as to what that should be. So we want P100 to get a result that everybody can live with, that will result in a settlement. But I haven't heard directly from any claimants that have had their claims put into P100. I'll probably hear indirectly once we talk to the task force, from some of the attorneys what they say their clients' perspectives were. And I'm interested in that.
Mm.
Thank you. I think it's important. It'd be nice to see, to get that information from the families. And I think it's so difficult because it's, the one and only time they'll do that, where the neutrals and the attorneys go through this process over and over. But I would love to see these claims go by quicker and get resolved quicker. And I think it would be very interesting to to see how the claimants are responding and how they are feeling about the whole process. And thank you so much for presenting.
Well, thank you. And one extra thing I'll throw out. I think sometimes the neutral process can be effective sometimes because for example, former Special Master Golkowitz, part of his evaluative process is to go visit the actual family or see the party. And a lot of times when I'm adjudicating a case, I don't meet the petitioner until there's a hearing. And it would be hard to figure out how to sort of fit me into that. But the neutral can do that. And a lot of times that is really important to bringing things together. And that makes people feel like they're taken seriously too. It's another way to do it. But that's very important that we make sure that the claimants at the end of the day know their claim is being looked at seriously, and that if they're entitled to this compensation, we get it to them as quickly as we can.
Thank you.
Thanks. May I ask you one more question that's come up before the group on several occasions, and I don't know if there's a specific answer, but just your thoughts. That is, the program was initially designed to compensate children and their families who had suffered an injury from a vaccine. And as you pointed out, the vast majority of cases now are claims of shoulder injury following particularly the influenza vaccine. And that really wasn't the initial intention of the legislation, but it's understandable how it's evolved. Do you have any comments about that?
Well, we're here at OSM, to be the judicial body, for whatever it's worth, within the Court of Federal Claims to resolve these cases, as the law says. So, I'm not, if a vaccine's on the table and if there's a cause of action that allows somebody who's been injured to assert the claim, I'm going to take it seriously, whatever it is. The process by which the program has evolved, I mean, who knows? It's a function of vaccinations more widespread, the best intentions when the program was started. Time has shown that other kinds of claims were going to be permitted too. That, at the end of the day, it almost doesn't matter from my perspective, because I'm not called to sort of say whether a vaccine should or should not be on the table, whether an injury is or isn't part of the table or is a non-table. I just have to apply the law the way any sort of judge would, who's doing a bench trial, like the judges above us in the Court of Federal Claims, and that's what I try to do. So, yes, it's interesting to observe how many claims are brought on behalf of grown-ups or by adults and not on behalf of children. There's some good, one thing I'll say is that the judicial conference for the court last month, and one of the petitioner's bar folks sort of noted that he thought he had observed that the amount of judgments was decreasing, and he kind of wondered what that meant. But one of the perspectives that was offered in response was it's great that people are not suffering injuries that are deemed catastrophic, requiring enormous sums of money to compensate, and that children aren't as often getting injured, and whatever the result is, it is. I don't know, but that's a very nice thing to see in a way. But at the end of the day, we're resolving the cases before us and applying the law.
Yep, and you perform such a critical function. The court is plays a major role, I think, in the widespread acceptance of vaccines and the immunization schedules. So thank you very much for your service and what you're doing. It is very critical.
Thank
So
you.
are there any other comments or questions? We're a little bit past the time that you had generously offered us. And so if there are no further questions, thanks so much, Chief Special Master Corcoran. Anytime you feel that we might be able to help you or things that you would like to share with us, we're more than interested. So thank you again.
Thanks.
Okay. Annie, shall we move on to the report from the Division of Injury Compensation?
Yes, Cody, I'm here. It's Tamara. I'm ready.
Okay, Tamara. Okay, good. I think you're up next.
Yes. All right. So thank you, everyone, for being here today, and I'll provide an update on the Division of Injury Compensation Programs activities. So the first, I'll just go over the agenda for the rest of the day. I'm providing an update on HRSA's vaccine injury compensation program activities. We'll also have the regular update from the Department of Justice and updates from the ex officio members from FDA, CDC, NIH, and OIDP. And then we'll get an update from the ACCV work group. And we will also, it's not listed here, but discuss proposed language to add to the vaccine information statements. And this is language that will provide more information about the program statute of limitations. And then the members will review several vaccine information statements. So this slide provides information on the number of petitions filed. And this slide looks different than it has in the past because during the September meeting, members wanted information about the number of claims filed by adults versus children. So we've included that information in this slide. And on average, we've had about 545 claims filed from 2011 to 2015. Now, with the breakdown of adults versus children, so how the program defines children is if 18 years, basically it's under 18 years of age. I know it says 18 years and under, but it's actually under 18 years of age. And so in 2019, we had 1,169 claims filed by adults, and children we had 113, for a total of 1,282 claims. And you can see that in the two previous fiscal years, the number of total claims filed have been about the same. So in 2017, we had a total of 1,243 filed, and in 2018, we had a total of 1,238 claims. So it seems like the number of claims that are being filed is sort of leveling off in the program. This chart here just depicts graphically the information that I've just provided previously. This slide shows the administrative funding that the program has received compared to the number of claims that have been filed. And for the last two fiscal years, we've had the same amount of money, which is $9.2 million. And that's what this pretty much slide shows. This slide shows the petitions that are awaiting review as of December 3rd. So we still have claims that are in the backlog from 2019. At this point, we have 748 that have been filed by adults and one that has been filed by on behalf of a child, for a total of 749. And in 2020 so far, we've had 150 claims in the backlog and 7 that were filed on behalf of children, for a total of 157. So totally, we have 906 claims that are in the backlog. But I'll point out that for the claims that have been filed on behalf of children that are in this backlog, they're in the backlog because they have not been activated by the pre-assignment review. It's not that that they're here because we don't have the resources to review them. They're there because we don't have the medical records to review them. So just to make that clear. So the amount of awards that have been paid. So in 2019, we paid about $196 million in petitioners' awards and about $29 million in attorney's fees. And so far this fiscal year, which started October 1st, we paid about $26 million in awards to petitioners and about $5 million in attorney's fees. The number of adjudications as of December 1st. So in 2019, we had a total of 633 compensable cases. 143 were dismissed for a total of 776 claims that have been adjudicated in 2019. So far in 2020, we've determined, or the court has determined, that 82 are compensable, 24 have been dismissed for a total of 106. Now this slide breaks down the adjudication categories for claims. So if you look at 2019, in 2019 we had conceded about 37% of claims. And you can see that that went up from 2018 where we conceded 35% of claims. So what we're seeing is that with us having added injuries to the table back in 2017, that now we're conceding more claims because more injuries are on the table. And then you'll see that regarding settlements, in 2018, we had 319 settlements for a total of 59% of what we compensated were settled, whereas now, in 2019, there were 56% being settled. So you see there's a shift in us conceding more cases than we're settling now. And then this is the latest data for 2020 that's here. We're showing 37% that we've conceded so far and 61% we've settled. But again, that's at the beginning of the year, of this fiscal year.
Hey, Tamara, this is Dino. Can I ask one question about that slide?
Sure.
Slide 9?
Yes.
And this is back to basics here, and I apologize for that, but when you speak of adjudication categories, what is by adjudication there, do you mean adjudication by the special master, or do you mean determination by DOJ as to what approach is going to take to a particular claim, or neither?
So the adjudication category is ultimately, because the court decides the case, but it would be based on a combination, like the concessions are HHS conceding that the case, that the vaccine caused the injury. Whereas the court decision is the court having decided because HHS is not conceding that the vaccine caused the injury. And then in the settlement, a settlement is basically a negotiation between the parties for whatever reason, and then ultimately the court approves that settlement. So I'm not sure if that answers your question.
It does, and I should have looked more carefully at the slide, but I still have one just to make sure I've got the whole thing right. For the row that says not compensable, yes. So does that reflect instances in which the court has evaluated the claim and determined that it was not compensable based on the evidence?
Yes.
Got it. Okay.
Yes. So those would be dismissed cases. That's another term that we use for not compensable is dismissed cases.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Moving on to the next slide. Okay. The trust fund. So the trust fund has $3.8 billion in it. It continues to accumulate revenue through the excise tax, through interest on investments, and these numbers are reflected here. This is a relatively new slide because we haven't generally provided this in the past, but I thought that, because we've gotten questions about this over time, and so I thought that this would be good information to share with the ACCV. So these are sort of recent trends in the program. 90% of petitions were filed for adults in the last 2 fiscal years, and we just had that whole discussion, but it is true that 90% of claims that are filed on behalf of adults over the last 2 fiscal years. And then over 54% of petitions filed in the last 2 fiscal years allege a shoulder injury related to vaccine administration, or SERVA. 73% of petitions filed in the last 2 fiscal years allege an injury from the influenza vaccine. And then about 70% of petitions filed are compensated by negotiated settlements since fiscal year 2006. But as I mentioned, in 2019, that number has gone down to 56% because we're conceding more, and so we probably will see that either stay steady or possibly go down, the number of settlements, because we're conceding more claims. And then now there's nearly a 10-month waiting period for petitions to be reviewed by a HRSA physician. The last item that I'll discuss is that the maternal immunization final rule is still being reviewed by HHS. And we're not exactly, I don't have a time frame for that, but just to report that back to you all. And then that's it for my presentation, and I will take any questions at this point.
Thank you, Tamara. Great, clear presentations. Are there any questions?
Are people muted? Make sure you take it off mute if you're posing a question.
This is Kathy. No questions.
Okay. All right. Thank you,
This
everybody.
is Cody.
Oh, okay.
No, yeah, Tamara, are you still there?
Yes, I'm here. Yes.
Yep. I have one question for you. So, looking at the slides, I think it's 196 million was awarded in claims last year for 539 people. So that comes out to about $360,000 per claim, and most of those claims were shoulder injury. Is that correct?
Cody, I would have to analyze that 2019 petitioners award data to give you that insight for sure, because it depends on what's adjudicated in a particular year, and I would need to look at that data to be able to answer that accurately. So I can't say that that's the case for sure, because I'll remind you too with our program, and even Special Master Corcoran mentioned it, that it could have been a claim filed in 2005 that we're compensating in 2019, and that number would have been included in this petitioner awards amount. So I would actually need to look at that data to see what was actually compensated to determine, what potential injuries people allege, the average amount of the award, because,
Because, I mean, my thought, thank you for that, but my thought was that that seems like an awful lot of money for someone who's had a shoulder injury.
So, Cody, there could have been multiple cases of people with more severe injuries, in cases that were in the millions potentially, that have, other serious injuries, and so that would sort of skew the average. And it could have been, of the SERVA cases, on average, the SERVA cases could have been 100,000, whereas on average, more serious cases could have been about 1 million. So I would, like I said, I would need to look at that data to actually give the ACCV more specifics on the type of cases, the average amount for 2019. Okay.
I mean, I don't want to give you more work to do because I know you're busy, but it would be interesting to get a sense of those figures. That is, what is the award for shoulder injury claims?
We can do that and provide it at the next meeting.
That would be great. Thank you. Okay, if there are no further questions, I think we're a little bit ahead of schedule, which is good, and we're ready for the report from the Department of Justice by Ms. Catherine Reeves.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
So could we move to the next slide? Thank you. So this is my first slide where I tell you how many petitions were filed during our reporting period. We report usually for a period of several months, which is a different reporting period than what Tamara's slides were discussing, so that there's not any confusion. So this is for the period August 16th, 2019 through November 15th, 2019, and it shows that there were 376 petitions filed in the Court of Federal Claims under the Act. 33 of these were filed on behalf of minors and 343 on behalf of adults. And I'll just note that in comparison to the last reporting period, that's an increase in both of those numbers. There's 26 more cases filed on behalf of minors and 43 more cases filed on behalf of adults than the last reporting period. Slide, please. The total number of petitions adjudicated during this reporting period was 234. And of those, 181 cases were compensated, and of those, 66 of the cases were conceded by HHS, and then cases not conceded by HHS were 115. As far as the cases conceded, 2 of those were resolved by decisions from the court awarding damages. 64 of those cases were resolved through a decision adopting a proffer on award of compensation that was made by respondent. And then the cases not conceded by HHS, 110 of those cases were resolved via a settlement, 3 via a proffer on award of compensation by respondent, and 2 decisions awarding damages by the court. And then the next section of the slide is just noting that there were 53 cases that were not compensated or dismissed, and these were all non-OAP cases. Total petitions voluntarily withdrawn for this reporting period was 7, which is the same number as the last reporting period. During this reporting period, we received 2 decisions from the Court of Federal Claims. United States Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit. This is the court that has the authority to issue precedential opinions that are binding on the Office of Special Masters and the Court of Federal Claims. One of the significant decisions we received was in the Boatmon case. It was a case that the respondent appealed an entitlement ruling to the Court of Federal Claims. This was a case involving the allegations that childhood vaccinations caused sudden infant death syndrome. The Court of Federal Claims reversed the special master's finding on entitlement. The petitioners then appealed to the Federal Circuit. The Federal Circuit affirmed the Court of Federal Claims reversal of entitlement in that case. So it affirmed that the special master's decision finding that vaccines cause SIDS was error. We have a number of pending cases at the Federal Circuit. Those are all listed on the next slide. Ones that are in yellow are cases that were filed since the last reporting period. These were all appeals filed by petitioner. On the next slide, there is one case at the Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit that was filed by respondent. That is the Lozano case. During this reporting period, the Court of Federal Claims decided several cases that had been appealed by petitioner. Those are all listed on that slide. Okay, sorry, we're having a little technical difficulties here. And then the next slide is showing that none of the appeals that were filed by respondent there were no decisions in cases filed by the respondent, appeals filed by the respondent to the Court of Federal Claims. And then the next slide shows the number of appeals filed by petitioner at the Court of Federal Claims that are currently pending. Again, the cases that are in yellow are cases that were filed since the last reporting period. I'll just note, you'll see on the next slide that one of the cases appearing on this slide, Nvac, is also listed as an appeal filed by respondent, and that is because both the petitioner and respondent appealed the damages ruling in that case, which I believe is a first in the program that we had cross appeals. So that case is pending on both parties' appeals at the Court of Federal Claims right now, along with the other cases that are listed on that slide. We had an oral argument in the Cottingham case at the Federal Circuit this past Tuesday. That's an attorney's fees appeal. And we had an oral argument at the Court of Federal Claims in the FOP case yesterday, and that is a case that was appealed by petitioners on an entitlement, on a finding by the special master that the petitioner was not entitled to compensation. Then the next slides are it just shows you the adjudicated settlements between August 16th and November 15th, 2019. And it just shows the vaccinations, the alleged injuries, the amount of time it took from the time the petition was filed till the settlement was finalized, starting with the one that took the longest to resolve and ending with those that were resolved most quickly. And I will just note, you can see from these slides that most of the cases involve either the allegation of SIRVA as the injury or Guillain-Barré syndrome or GBS. And I will just note that the cases that took the least time were all resolved within a year of the petition being filed, and many of them were adjudicated in less than 2 years. In fact, most of our cases are resolved in less than 2 years, which is good. And then the rest of the slides are the appendix that we provide every meeting with glossary of terms. There is also a flow chart that shows how petitions are processed in the Office of Special Masters. There's also a slide on the levels of appeal in Vaccine Act cases. And then finally, there's the flow chart showing the appeals process that can be pursued under in Vaccine Act cases. And that's all I have. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Hi, this is Karen. I have a question. Can you explain to me a little more about the Boatman case, and that's a SIDS case?
That is a case that petitioners filed a claim alleging that their child died as a result of SIDS, and that the SIDS was caused by childhood vaccination.
And so they were originally awarded, and then they were denied in the appellate court?
The special master found petitioners entitled to compensation. The government appealed that decision to the Court of Federal Claims. The Court of Federal Claims reversed the finding of entitlement. Petitioners appealed the Court of Federal Claims decision to the Federal Circuit, and the Federal Circuit affirmed the Court of Federal Claims' denial of entitlement in the case.
I don't know if you even know this. Is that normal for SIDS cases to be appealed like that?
I don't know how to answer that question.
Okay.
We don't. Every case is different, and every case turns on its facts. So I can't say that anything is normal.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any additional questions, please?
Yeah, this is Dino. I wanted to ask about the time it takes to get to settlement. And I think you pointed out, Catherine, that the GBS and SIRVA cases tended to settle more quickly. And is it the case that the ones that take longer to settle are taking longer, not because the negotiation per se takes longer, but just it takes longer to work those cases up?
The time it takes for a case to settle can turn on any number of things, and I think that the fact that more CERVA cases are being settled is just a sign that more of the cases that are being filed are based on CERVA. And we settle cases for all different kinds of reasons. So a case could take longer to settle because we don't have sufficient documentation to support what the petitioners are seeking in the settlement, or the life care planning process in a particularly complicated case could take a long time because the person's needs are extensive. So there's lots of different reasons why some cases may take longer than others to resolve.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any further questions? Okay, well, thank you very much, Ms. Reeves, for another interesting presentation.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, we appreciate your time. So we're a little bit ahead of schedule. Should we take a break here, or can we move on to the CDC? Probably Dr. Wody's not on the line.
Hi, Hi, Cody. I'm on the line.
Oh, you are? Are you?
Yes, I am.
Yes. Are you prepared then to give your presentation?
Sure, if it's okay with everyone. I don't know if people want a break.
No, let's.
I'm flexible.
Well, let me ask others. What would people like to do? I'm comfortable going on for one more presentation. Any objections?
No objection.
I'm open. No objection.
Okay. Why don't you go ahead?
Okay. Thank you. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to present. If we begin on slide 2, that's our disclaimer slide that the content of the presentation does not represent the official position of the CDC, and any use of product trade names for this presentation is just for identification purposes only. Next slide. I'll be presenting an update on the routine childhood vaccines that we discussed at the October 2019 ACIP meeting. And if time permits, I'll also go over recent publications from the CDC's Immunization Safety Office. In the meeting book, I have included a few extra slides with information that we discussed during the meeting on non-routine childhood vaccines, such as rabies, in case people are interested. So if we go over to slide 5, during the October meeting, the ACIP continued to review the safety of repeat Tdap vaccination, and there were 2 reasons for this. One is that the package insert for Adacel, which is one of the U.S. licensed brand, has been revised to allow repeat administration 8 or more years after the first dose of Tdap. And the product now allows a booster dose for wound management if it has been 5 or more years since previous dose of a tetanus toxoid containing vaccine was received. And then in general, we think that in clinical practice, repeat Tdap vaccination is widespread. So the ACIP has continued their review of the safety of closely spaced Tdap vaccines based on the current catch-up immunization schedule. And closely spaced Tdap vaccine is a receipt of Tdap vaccine less than or equal to 12 months after a previous dose. So their published studies on closely spaced Tdap vaccination is limited, but there are 2 related studies that were found and were reviewed and discussed during the meeting. The first study by Taten and colleagues is a randomized controlled trial of about 400 adults from 3 European countries with unknown Tdap vaccination history or have not received a Tdap vaccine for 20 years. These adults were randomized to a 0-1 6-month schedule to receive either 3 doses of Tdap or 1 dose of combined Tdap and inactivated polio vaccine, followed by 2 doses of tetanus and diphtheria, no pertussis component, or to receive 3 doses of Tdap diphtheria vaccine. And in this study, they found no difference in local or systemic symptoms between those who received the Tdap versus those who received the TD group. The next study is a cohort study by Fortner and colleagues that included about 370 pregnant women and 225 non-pregnant women in the United States. The study was not designed to evaluate repeat Tdap vaccination, but there were 8 participants who were noted to have received closely spaced Tdap vaccines. And in these 8 women, they did not report any severe local or systemic reactions, and there was also no adverse events of concern. Other unpublished data that were reviewed and discussed were from the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System and the Vaccine Safety Data Link. And to add some context to this slide, between January 1st, 1990 and June 30th, 2019, VAERS had received about 35,000 reports following Tdap vaccination, and 340 involved multiple doses. So of those reports, there were only 88 where Tdap was given within 12 months. And 21 of those 88 reports described an adverse event. The most common were localized injection site reactions, and then the other reports were vaccination errors. The vaccine review from the Vaccine Safety Data Link was done on existing data sets from published studies. The first was a supplemental analysis on a cohort of about 1,400 non-pregnant persons aged 11 to 64 years who had received Tdap or TD within 12 months of a prior Tdap vaccine. And when they compared those who had received closely spaced Tdap with those who had received the TD, there was no difference in the outcomes. And the outcomes they looked at were localized reactions such as cellulitis, limb swelling, pain in the limb, and a whole range of neurological disorders, including encephalopathy, meningitis, cranial nerve disorders. And the second review done by the VSD was using a previous data set on the safety of Tdap in pregnant women. About 187 women in that study were analyzed, and the outcomes they looked at were acute adverse events such as fever, allergy, local reactions, and adverse birth outcomes. And when in adverse birth outcomes, the rates were similar to pregnant women exposed to a single Tdap dose during the same pregnancy. There was one woman who reported having limb pain and swelling 7 days after delivery. So the next slide, please. After the discussion, the conclusion was that the published data on the closely spaced vaccine showed no increase in adverse events after Tdap compared to TD. And unpublished data of closely spaced Tdap vaccine showed no unusual or increased reporting of adverse events. But we noted that the safety data is limited, but the review of both the published and unpublished data was reassuring. So there was a vote during the meeting on several use of Tdap, and the ACIP voted to allow Tdap to be used in 3 situations that typically called for the TD vaccine. The first one was in the 10-year TD booster, so now clinicians, they voted to allow using Tdap or TD for the 10-year booster. The second situation is wound management for non-pregnant persons who have previously been vaccinated with Tdap. And the third situation was catch-up vaccination for people 7 years and older, regardless of pregnancy status. And I will just note here that the approved minimum age for the U.S. licensed Tdap vaccine is 10 years, and the ACIP recommends routine vaccination at 11 through 12 years of age. So there was guidance that was needed for children who are younger than 10 years who inadvertently received Tdap vaccine. And so the guidance that was provided was that if they received the Tdap vaccine at 7 through 9 years, they should get the routine Tdap again at 11 or 12. But if they received it at least 10 years, at least 10 years of age, then they do not need to get the repeat dose at 11 or 12 years. So they were the 2020 childhood immunization schedule was discussed during the meeting and approved. And these are just some general guidelines for the ACIP approval process. Annual schedules reflect recommendations already approved by the ACIP, so no new policies are established. And the approval is needed prior to publication by the CDC in the February 2020 Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. And then there are other several professional organizations noted on the slide that also approved the schedule prior to the publication. And this is a summary of the updates that are recommended for the 2020 Child and Adolescent schedule, and these have been previously approved by the ACIP. There are no new policies. So if we go back to slide 14, this is an update of the influenza activity in the U.S. that was discussed, and this meeting occurred in October, so it was quite early in the influenza season, and the overall influenza activity was noted to be low. Although the numbers were small, most were like H3N2 viruses, but we are not sure which virus were predominant during the season. And the components of the strains for this influenza season looked appropriate. On slide 15, although this is not applicable to the childhood vaccine, I thought that it would be helpful to share a review that is ongoing for older adults. It's a systematic review of meta-analysis to evaluate the harm versus benefits of the various types of influenza vaccine recommended for use in adults 65 years and older. There are two brands of influenza vaccines that are specifically approved for this age group because they are more at risk for hospitalization due to influenza, and the vaccines are generally low. The effectiveness of the vaccines are generally lower for this age group. So this review would evaluate the safety outcomes noted on the slide. On slide 17, we have a summary of the measles outbreak in New York, and the factors contributing to the outbreak were noted to be increasing measles infection globally, importation of cases to the U.S., and vaccine hesitancy and targeted anti-vaccine activity. During this outbreak, there has been no death or encephalitis reported, but there have been 28 cases of pneumonia and hospitalization. Currently, there are efforts that are ongoing to increase vaccine coverage, including legislative actions. And if we go back to slide 19, the director of the CDC's Immunization Safety Program presented an update on an overview of our vaccine safety monitoring system. We have 3 core programs in the CDC Immunization Safety Office: the Vaccine Adverse Reporting System known as VAERS, which many people are familiar with, the Vaccine Safety Data Link known as VSD, and the Clinical Immunization Safety Assessment Project known as CISA. VAERS is a collaboration between the CDC and the FDA, and it's the frontline spontaneous reporting system for our post-licensure vaccine safety monitoring. Analysis of VAERS data helps to identify potential concerns that may require further investigation. In general, VAERS data cannot be used to assess causality of an adverse event. VSD is a collaboration between the CDC and 8 integrated healthcare system, and it's actually the system we use most for vaccine safety monitoring in the U.S. It's a large linked database system with over 12 million members, and it's used for active surveillance and research. The CISA project is a smaller team. It's a collaboration between the CDC and 7 academic centers. And its core function is to conduct individual clinical vaccine safety assessments. We have a service for healthcare providers in the U.S. where we can help them with vaccine safety questions. And we also conduct prospective clinical research. Now I'll quickly go over some recent publications from the Immunization Safety Office. And on slide 22, this is a publication by Dr. Morrow and colleagues where they published their opinions on the challenges in evaluating post-licensure vaccine safety. And some challenges identified were co-founding, misclassification of vaccination status, and concurrent vaccination. They also suggested some measures to address these challenges. And on slide 23, we have a publication from Dr. McNeil and colleagues where they reviewed VAERS to describe adverse events following adenovirus vaccine. And they found 100 reports, and almost all cases received concurrent vaccination or an antibiotic. And they concluded that the reporting rate for serious adverse events after this vaccine was higher than other vaccines administered in military recruit populations. Next slide. And this is a study evaluating the current evidence of primary ovarian insufficiency and the HPV vaccine. Dr. Christensen and colleagues, including me, reviewed and summarized the current evidence associating HPV vaccination and primary ovarian insufficiency. And we concluded that the current evidence is insufficient to suggest or support a causal association between HPV vaccine and primary ovarian insufficiency. And on slide 25, this is a publication for the ACCV recommendations for preventing seasonal influenza vaccine. And on slide 26, Dr. Donoghue and colleagues in VS, they continue to publish their work evaluating the association between inactivated influenza vaccine and spontaneous abortion. And this study looked at the risk in the 2012-13 and 2014-15 influenza seasons, and they found no association between inactivated influenza vaccine and spontaneous abortion, including among women vaccinated in the previous season. And the last study was by Dr. Groom and colleagues, also in VSD, where they published their findings on the uptake and safety of hepatitis A vaccination during pregnancy. And we discussed some of this during the last meeting, where there was an association between, they found an association between hepatitis A vaccination and small for gestational age. But the authors think that this is likely due to unmeasured confounding and warrants further exploration. So that's the end of my presentation, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for that presentation, Patricia. Are there any questions?
This is Karen. I have a couple questions. On the pregnant studies in the beginning on the Tdap, when you look at the studies, how long are you following that person? Does that say in the studies how long you're following after the vaccination? How long are they watching for results for injuries?
Is that the study on slide 6 from Fortney and colleagues?
Yeah, it was
the one by the VSD.
Well, I was curious about this slide, and it's because when you started talking about this, you started talking about there was 1,000 or so people in the study, and then it came down to the number of 8. And so when you're saying there's no severe local or systemic reactions, how long is this person being watched? Like, what does the study consist of? It's for the 12 months?
Is that slide 7?
It's the slide that's up right now.
Oh, sorry, I'm not on Skype. I'm sorry.
Okay. I don't see a number here in front of me, but it's the ACIP update for testis-containing vaccines.
I think it's slide 6.
Okay.
Slide
on the very...
Okay. Yeah, that's a study. They were followed for reactogenic events, which is looking at injection site reactions and things like fever. They were followed for the first 8 days after vaccination. And then for all other adverse events, including, there are some pregnancy outcome studies that have not been published, but the pregnant women were followed until 6 months after they gave birth. But not all, and this study is published, I could share it. Not, they were followed for serious adverse events until 6 months after delivery.
Okay. Okay, thank you for answering.
Yeah, and I believe the authors are planning to publish the pregnancy outcome studies soon.
Okay, thank you for that. And then I have a question on the measles outbreaks. Do you know the percentage of those that were hospitalized, and if those people were fully vaccinated, and the people that, and then second question to that, were there any vaccine strains infection in play with those people who had the measles?
Unfortunately, I don't have answers to those questions. That's outside the immunization safety office. Well, if you send me an email with your questions, I can direct your questions to the people who can help answer.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you.
You're welcome.
This is Dino. I also have a question about the measles outbreak, but it might also be one that you're not equipped to answer at the moment. Do you know what the age distribution is of the people who contracted measles, even just in general terms? Like, was it children under 5 or older people or what?
Unfortunately, I don't, but I could get back to you with response to these questions. Okay.
All right. Or do you know if it's published anywhere, or is it? I imagine it being.
There's an MMWR, a CDC publication on the outbreak, so I can get that to you.
Fair enough. Well, I can just look it up. Actually, I don't want to add to your to-do list.
Okay. Thank you.
This is Cody, and can I ask 2 questions? And again, this may not be an easy question to answer, but has the CDC decided that enough time has passed since the last measles case in New York so that that outbreak is over? I seem to remember hearing that. Do you know if that's correct?
I don't know if that is correct.
Okay.
No work is ongoing on the outbreak here.
Yeah. The second question I had is, so what is planned to address the issue of SGA infants, small for gestational age infants, among women who receive the hepatitis A vaccine during pregnancy? Is that going to be studied, or how will that be handled now?
I will take that back to my director. I don't know if they've made a decision that's above my pay grade. Well, one of the problems with the study is that there are very few women who receive hepatitis A vaccines during pregnancy.
Yes.
So I think that will be a challenge for the studies.
Yep. And because the likelihood, I mean, it isn't biologically plausible, seems to me, but it's an issue I think that's important to address.
Yes, that I agree. Yes, I agree. Okay, any further questions?
Okay, well, thank you very much for your presentation, Patricia. It was quite interesting. And I think we're now at noon time. So, Annie, shall we take our break here for? And it looks like we've got an hour and 15 minutes. I don't know. Do we need all of that?
That's totally up to you guys if you want to keep moving. I believe we have Claire and even Valerie on the line, or if you wanted to take a short 15-minute break, or...
Why don't, well, I would, is half an hour enough time for people to eat lunch, and then we could reassemble at 12:30 and begin with Claire? Is that okay with people?
That's fine with me.
That's fine by me.
That's okay.
All right. Then, if there are no concerns with that, why don't we adjourn for the moment and come back in about 35 minutes?
Sounds
Okay.
good.
All right.
Okay.
See you then.
So
All right, thank y'all.
Okay.
So I'll start with a few updates about our influenza research, including a new NIAID-sponsored influenza human challenge study. A clinical trial in which healthy adults will be deliberately infected with influenza virus under carefully controlled conditions is recruiting volunteers at 4 NIAID-supported vaccine and treatment evaluation units, or VTEUs. Participating sites include the University of Maryland School of Medicine, Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center, Duke University, and St. Louis University Center for Vaccine Development. As part of the study, researchers will look at how levels of pre-existing influenza antibodies impact the timing, magnitude, and duration of flu symptoms following exposure to influenza virus. Up to 80 people between the ages of 18 and 50 will be enrolled in the trial. The volunteers will receive a nasal spray containing a strain of seasonal influenza virus made under good manufacturing practice conditions. This challenge virus was developed by NIAID scientists and reliably produces mild to moderate influenza disease in most recipients. In previous influenza challenge trials conducted at the NIH Clinical Center, no significant safety issues or severe or complicated cases of influenza occurred, and no transmission of the virus outside of the clinic was seen. Preliminary results from the new trial are expected in May 2020. Next slide, please.
Is that a hemagglutinin molecule on the first slide?
You know, I would have to go and check on the image. So NIAID has a Flickr page where we have images of different pathogens available for the public to download also, and they're copyright-free images. And that was the source of that image.
Oh, great. Okay, thanks.
NIAID recently initiated the Collaborative Influenza Vaccine Innovation Centers, or CIVICS program, a new network of research centers that will work together in a coordinated multidisciplinary effort to develop more durable, broadly protective, and longer-lasting influenza vaccines. NIAID will provide up to approximately $51 million in total first-year funding for this program. CIVICS, a 7-year program, will develop universal influenza vaccines, which could provide longer-lasting protection than current vaccines and against a wider variety of influenza viruses. The CIVICS centers will conduct multidisciplinary research that supports the development and testing of vaccine candidates in preclinical studies, clinical trials, and human challenge studies. The network also will explore approaches to improve seasonal influenza vaccine, such as testing alternative vaccine platforms or incorporating new adjuvants. The CIVICS program will include 3 vaccine centers based at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai, Duke University, and University of Georgia, 1 vaccine manufacturing and toxicology core at Duke University, 2 clinical cores at the University of Maryland School of Medicine and Duke University, and 1 statistical data management and coordination center at Digital Infusion, Inc. Next slide, please.
now moving on to a tuberculosis update, but first, yes, Cody, to confirm the image on the first slide, it is a 3D image of hemagglutinin.
Thank you, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So another large significant program that we have just funded is focusing on TB immunology and vaccine research. And we've awarded $30 million in first-year funding to support this program. TB is the world's leading infectious cause of death and remains a major global health concern. New and improved TB vaccines are badly needed. TB is caused by the bacterium Mycobacterium tuberculosis, known as MTB, which spreads from person to person through airborne transmission. The new contract awards establish and provide up to 7 years of support for 3 immune mechanisms of protection against Mycobacterium tuberculosis, or MPAC-TB for short, centers, to elucidate the immune responses needed to protect against MTB infection. A better understanding of TB immunology is critical to guide the design and development of new and improved TB vaccines, and aligns with the goals of the NIAID Strategic Plan for Tuberculosis Research. These new contracts were awarded to the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, the Infectious Disease Research Institute, and Seattle Children's Hospital. Next slide, please. So the next few slides aren't specifically related to vaccines, but we thought that they might be of interest to the group. A study funded by the NIH suggests that treating preterm infants with antibiotics for more than 20 months appears to promote the development of multi-drug resistant gut bacteria. Researchers used high-speed DNA sequencing and advanced computational analysis to study stool samples from 32 infants born very preterm who received antibiotic treatment for 21 months, 9 infants born very preterm who received antibiotics for less than a week, and 17 healthy term and late preterm infants who had not received antibiotics. The infants who received prolonged antibiotic treatment had less diverse bacterial populations in their gut compared to the other infants, and these bacteria contained more antibiotic resistance genes. The researchers note that previous studies linked antibiotic treatment during infancy with allergies, psoriasis, obesity, diabetes, and inflammatory bowel disease later in life. Their findings raise the possibility that early life antibiotic use may promote these effects by reducing the diversity of microbial communities in the gut, encouraging the growth of harmful bacteria species, and perhaps also suppressing the growth of beneficial microbes. This paper appeared in Nature Microbiology on September 9th, 2019. Next slide, please. So before I talk about the science advance, I wanted to focus a little on the note and the photo on this slide. So this note was written by an 8-year-old girl, Jenny, back in 1989, when the now NIH director, Dr. Francis Collins and colleagues discovered the gene for cystic fibrosis. And Jenny wrote, "Today is the most best day ever in my life. They found a gene for cystic fibrosis." And the picture to the right is of Jenny today running with her daughter, Pipaloo. So this update comes from Dr. Collins' blog. He reports that 2 international teams, including researchers partly supported by NIH, report impressive results from phase 3 clinical trials of a triple drug therapy for individuals with cystic fibrosis, CF, and at least 1 copy of the most common CF-causing mutation, known as PHE508DEL. The new triple drug therapy was developed by Vertex Pharmaceuticals and recently approved by the FDA. The final results from 2 phase 3 multi-center randomized clinical trials demonstrated the safety and efficacy of this triple combination therapy for people with either 1 or 2 copies of this mutation, which represents about 90% of the people with CF. Patients in both trials experienced striking improvements in a key measure of lung capacity, and in sweat chloride levels, which show if the drugs are working throughout the body. In addition, the therapy was generally safe and well tolerated, with less than 1% of patients discontinuing the treatment due to adverse effects. More work remains to be done to help the approximately 10% of CF patients without this mutation and to someday find a permanent cure for CF. Next slide, please. And last, I wanted to note that NIAID's 2019 Joseph J. Kinyoun Memorial Lecture was held on November 19th on the NIH campus in Bethesda, Maryland. Dr. Ian A. Wilson from the Scripps Research Institute presented on structure-assisted design of universal vaccines and therapeutics against influenza virus. He explained how insights gained through structural biology approaches are aiding in devising new ways to treat or prevent influenza, including developing new products with broad and durable protection against multiple influenza strains. The archive videocast is available to the public using the link at the bottom of this slide and searching Kinyoun Lecture. That concludes my talk for today, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Pretty dramatic stuff that you're talking about. The cystic fibrosis story is remarkable and really a tribute to the NIH and the others who've been working on this. CF is the most common inherited disease among Caucasians, and that's such a big step forward. So thank you for that. Are there any questions for Claire?
This is Karen. I have a question, Claire. First, I want to thank you for just speaking so clearly and slowly. So it took me it was great to just be able to totally comprehend what you were saying. I have a question on the antibiotic study, and the 58 infants, did they study if they were breastfed or not breastfed? I'm just curious. I was trying to look up the report.
Yeah, I can send you a link to the paper. I need to go back and look into that as well.
Perfect. I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Sure. Yeah, I'll share that with the entire group.
This is Dino. Yeah, this is Dino. Thank you, Claire, for the presentation. Also on that antibiotic study, I was just curious as to whether it's standard of care treatment for any preterm infant to treat them with antibiotics. That was kind of the impression I was getting, but I couldn't tell if that was the case.
Yeah, again, I would have to refer to the paper. I know that many of the children in the NICU sort of have delicate health conditions, so I don't know if any of the pediatricians can speak to that, about whether this would be standard of care.
Sure, I'm happy to comment there. And Dino, it's a good question. I think most, as Claire noted, most infants in a neonatal ICU end up on prolonged courses of antibiotics. It's just part of the complicated process of growing up if an infant is born very prematurely. Every effort is made to minimize their antibiotic exposure because of this issue of resistance, but also it's necessary to treat children or infants who appear to have a bacterial infection. And I was struck by the presentation because I think you said they had 20 or more months of antibiotics. That seems like an awfully long time.
I thought it was weeks. Was it months?
No, it does say months.
Months, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I can't imagine, and I wonder if that was a misprint. But at any rate, I would appreciate the opportunity to see the link to that publication.
Yeah, I'm happy to send that around.
Okay, well, if there are no other questions, thank you, Claire, for that succinct presentation. Very exciting. And is David Kim on the line?
Yes, I am.
Well,
Hi, David.
we have Valerie, the FDA presentation next, Cody.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And then Dr. Kim. That's okay.
All right. Valerie.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
Hi. I was just making sure my slides are posted before I begin. Good afternoon. My name is Commander Valerie Marshall, and I will be providing a brief update from the Food and Drug Administration. Next slide, please. Back one, please. Thank you. On September 24, 2019, the Food and Drug Administration announced the approval of JYNNEOS smallpox and monkeypox vaccine, live, non-replicating, for the prevention of smallpox and monkeypox disease in adults 18 years of age and older, determined to be at high risk for smallpox or monkeypox infection. This is the only currently FDA-approved vaccine for the prevention of monkeypox disease. Although naturally occurring smallpox disease is no longer a global threat, its intentional release of this highly contagious virus could have a devastating effect. This approval reflects the U.S. government's commitment to emergency preparedness. The vaccine will be stored in the Strategic National Stockpile. Next slide, please. On November 8, 2019, the Vaccines and Related Biological Products Advisory Committee met to discuss and make recommendations on the development of chikungunya vaccines. The VRPAC was convened to obtain the committee's guidance on the type of studies that can be conducted to demonstrate the effectiveness of chikungunya vaccine candidates. Chikungunya is a viral disease transmitted to humans by infected mosquitoes. It causes fever and severe joint pain. Other symptoms include muscle pain, headache, nausea, fatigue, and rash. The meeting included presentations on the epidemiology of chikungunya, models to assess effectiveness, and presentations from vaccine manufacturers on vaccines currently in development. The committee discussed the feasibility of randomized trials, given that chikungunya outbreaks are irregular and unpredictable, and some committee members noted that these studies would be logistically challenging. The committee also discussed approaches to assess effectiveness of chikungunya vaccines, including a non-human primate challenge model. Several committee members found this data to be promising. The FDA is currently deliberating on the advice of the committee. This concludes my report. Thank you. I will take any questions that you may have this time.
Sorry, I was unfamiliar with the chikungunya virus, the mosquito-borne illness, and I wondered what countries do we see that?
It was first described in Tanzania, but it's mainly been confined to outbreaks in Africa and Asia. However, in 2007, cases were identified in Italy and France, and now outbreaks have occurred in the Caribbean, Central America, and South America. And then also in Puerto Rico and in the United States as well.
Children and adults?
Yes, children and adults.
Thank you.
Any additional questions for Valerie? Okay. Well, thanks very much, Valerie.
Thank you.
And we'll move on to David Kim.
Thank you very much. I would like to briefly go over 3 of the major items that may be pertinent to this commission discussion from the Office of Infectious Disease and HIV/AIDS Policy. Next slide, please. First, the National Vaccine Plan for 2020. The objective, many of you have heard this discussion before, and the remaining 2 topic areas, and I'm basically providing you with the recent happenings since the last meeting. So the objective of the National Vaccine Plan is to update the 2010 plan and combine that with the National Adult Vaccine Plan that was published in 2015. So our goal is to develop a concise and brief plan that combines the adult and the childhood vaccination policies and programs for 2020. And the goal is to develop a 5-year outlook on immunization for across the lifespan, meaning children, adolescents, and adults, including older adults. So what we've done was to analyze the stakeholder interviews, and many of these interviews were conducted in individually and in small focus groups. We also collected over a 30-day period public comments, and we collected over 1,300 comments submitted by individuals and organizations in the public arena, and we have synthesized a plan, and the goal is to synthesize a plan based on the following 5 goals. Number 1, to support vaccine innovation. Number 2, increase vaccine safety. Number 3, something that's gaining greater prominence, and that is to increase vaccine confidence. Number 4, to optimize access, meaning access to vaccines both physically as well as financially. And number 5, to promote global immunization that puts us as a citizen of the world. And the timeline is to release the National Vaccine Plan in the fall of next year. Next slide, please. Next item is the National Vaccine Advisory Committee. And briefly, as a background, the Nvac, National Vaccine Advisory Committee, is a committee, federal advisory committee, that convenes 3 times a year to advise the Assistant Secretary for Health, who has been designated as a director of the National Vaccine Program. And that responsibility has been delegated to the Office of Infectious Disease and HIV/AIDS Policy, and the goal is to provide the ASH with the information that he needs to continue his work on vaccine development, safety, efficacy, and supply. And like I said, the committee meets 3 times per year, and recently the group was charged to draft reports. Was charged by the ASH to draft reports on 2 items. Number 1, vaccine confidence, and number 2, immunization equity. So to eliminate the disparity among populations in our immunization efforts. And the timeline for this is for the 2 subgroups of Nvac to submit reports to the ASH by September 2020. Next slide, please. And the third item is on Healthy People 2030. As you know, Healthy People 2020 is being revised to be simplified as well as to expand in certain areas. And specifically in the area of immunization, I think this is one reference source that vaccine service providers really look upon with a lot of interest, because it in addition to the National Vaccine Plan, it gives us a roadmap as to what the national plan considers important. Healthy People 2030, the goal of that is to provide a science-based 10-year national objective for improving the health of Americans, and it is run through the Office of Disease Prevention and Health Promotion, and in it, for 2030, we included 2 new proposals that relate to immunization. So these are developmental objectives in HP 2030. So that means over the next 2 to 3 years, these developmental objectives will be worked out more carefully, and measures and targets and such will be made for it to be incorporated into Health People 2030 as a core measure. So the two new proposed measures include, number one, the adult immunization composite measure. Now, this is when we say a composite measure, it's basically one measure that includes a number of routinely recommended immunizations for adults specifically based on age. So that would include influenza vaccination, pneumococcal vaccination, zoster, Tdap, and shingles vaccination. So 5 items for as a part of this composite measure based on age, of course. And the second item that is a developmental objective in Healthy People 2030 is the Immunization Information System, commonly known as Vaccine Registry, which is run by immunization programs around the country. And the goal is to ensure that the IIS, Immunization Information System, is capable of capturing immunization data across the lifespan of the constituents of each of these jurisdictions. The timeline for that is that these two developmental objectives have been crafted and submitted to HHS to the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services for approval, and that decision is pending. But we're encouraged that these two additional developmental objectives will be incorporated. And that concludes my updates from the Office of Infectious Disease and HIV/AIDS Policy. And I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, David. That's great. I'd like to ask you the first question. In regard to the Healthy People 2030 program, how far along is that, and who is participating in the drafting of that?
Well, this has been ongoing for a number of years now, and the Healthy People 2030 is being drafted by the Office of Disease Prevention and Health Promotion out of the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Health, and it has been pretty much all the objectives have been vetted and have been submitted to Secretary Azar for approval. So that decision is pending any time. The plan is to, I believe, of course, things can change, but the plan is to have a kickoff in spring 2020.
Okay, thanks. So that won't be open for public comment?
That is not open for public comment.
Hi, Cody, this is Claire. Oh, go ahead.
Sure. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry. I have a question. So when you say you're going to data capture, what exactly, how would you be data capturing this information for the adult program?
Are you talking about adult immunization, or you're talking about IIS data capture?
Right. You said that you would be doing that. You would data capture across the lifespan. Is that so? I'm guessing that's just from being born to adulthood, or can you just explain what that means?
Thanks for that question. IIS is complex, subject to state laws and regulations, as well as program management limitations and abilities. So, and there are historically there's been that IIS has had an emphasis on the pediatric immunization data collection, and rightly so. There's vaccines for children and other programs that specifically target immunization for children and adolescents, and a lot of the success we've had was because of our ability to capture data. When we compare that to immunization for adults, there's a great deal of varying practices and varying abilities of immunization programs to get that information. There are some inherent challenges in collecting immunization information for adults, and so developmental objective aims to specifically capture, to promote promote activities that capture immunization data for children, adolescents, and adults, meaning across the lifespan. I can give you a specific example. Say in Texas, when there's a great practice of providers submitting vaccine registry information to the Texas Immunization Information System, and that it really is a robust system. But Texas also is an opt-in state as far as regulations go, meaning when a child turns 18, is now able to make his or her own health decision making, then he or she needs to opt in, meaning specifically grant the authority for healthcare providers to submit the information into the IIS. So there's that added challenge of having to discuss the need to collect data from individuals who receive vaccination. But Texas also has another challenge that within a certain amount of time, if there is no opt-in, if the person does not opt in, then the data actually gets destroyed. So there is no transition from childhood to adult. The childhood data registry for that person simply disappears if he or she does not grant immunization programs to continue on as a vaccinate the program to continue its data collection through adulthood. So there are some things that really require us to look at the system much more closely and to manage things based on the limitations that we face at each of these immunization jurisdictions. So the proposal is to actually have an objective that incorporates on a large at a grand scale that ensures that vaccination information does not get lost, and that we collect the information throughout one's life so that the registry can continue functioning to help ensure that the person can receive the vaccination he or she needs, whether that was done at birth or through older adulthood. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, I mean, thank you so much. I know it's projected in the future. So would this be something that would be connected with driver's license? I know that there's a country now that you can't come into the country if you are not vaccinated. So when you say data collection, is this something that you guys are talking about where you have your new ID and it has that information on it, or you're just talking about volunteering this information to be collected by the patient?
Okay, so a simple answer to that is what you said in the latter part. There's another program as far as immunization requirements for persons entering this country, specifically for immigrants and refugees who come in with permanent residency qualifications, as well as people who adjust their status once they're in the U.S. That's a bit of a different issue, but as far as requirements, similar to say having a valid driver's license, where you're compelled to have vaccines before you're issued whatever clearance that you might need. There is no such thing presently in this country. So the system is actually on a especially for adults, it's more it's on a voluntary status.
Thank you so much for clarifying that. Appreciate it.
Any other questions for David Kim?
I just found it so interesting that in the Texas immunization information database, that when an individual turns 18, they have to actively opt in for their data to remain in the system, if I understood you correctly.
That is correct.
And if that, I mean, a typical 18-year-old may not be thinking about that and actively pursue something like that. And not only would that be a potential problem for any meta-analysis that might be done, that might be a problem for them because that's a permanent record that could be helpful for them to have of their immunization history.
I can't agree with you more.
Okay, sure. Thank you for that information.
Just as an added thought, New York City has similar opt-in provision for immunization for adults. Although New York City does not purge information without the opt-in, but New York City has the vaccine program there has done some creative things to help ensure that people are enrolled in the city's vaccine registry, IIS, and that is at the time that that a provider is discussing excuse me, immunization with a patient and getting while they're getting the consent for the vaccine, they are also asked to at the same time they're presented with the opt-in form. Mm. So there are some creative ways to ensure that you have the greatest amount of cooperation from the patient at the right time. So there are some things that you can do, but we're all subject to whatever the local and state regulations and laws are, and IIS is subject to those things.
And is Texas the only state that has the situation you described?
As far as I know, yes.
Okay, thank you.
So Cody, if I could clarify a few points. This is Claire from NIH about the microbiome paper.
Sure.
So we went back and looked at the 21 months for the very preterm infants, and it was not continuous antibiotic treatment over the 21 months. On average, the median were 8 courses of antibiotic treatment. So I think they're defining it as extensive antibiotic treatment over 21 months. So that's very different than continuous treatment over 21 months. And also, I don't see that they look at breastfeeding, but they do cite a paper from 2018 that looks at maternal gut and breast milk microbiota and how that may affect antibiotic resistance genes in the infant gut microbiota. And I can send information about that paper around as well.
Thank you, Claire. That's very helpful.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I think we're ready for Tamara, for you to talk to us about the language change.
Okay. Yes. So Annie, place the slide up. So as a result of the meeting that we had, excuse me, last month, well, not last month, September of 2019 at the last ACCV meeting, the ACCV reviewed some vaccine information statements and had, there were comments that the language about the vaccine injury compensation program's time frames for filing a claim were, the language that is currently in the vaccine information statements was not specific enough about the various time frames. So as you will see, the language that's currently in the VIS is there is a time limit to file a claim for compensation. So we did work, us and OGC together, and are proposing some additional language to add, or some replacement language to add to the vaccine information statement for the ACCV's consideration. And then ultimately, if the ACCV is okay with this language, then it would be up to CDC of whether or not this language would be incorporated into the vaccine information statement since they developed the vaccine information statement. But the proposed language now would be, please note that with limited exceptions, all petitions must be filed within 3 years after the first symptom of the alleged vaccine injury or within 2 years of the death and 4 years after the first symptom of the alleged vaccine injury that resulted in death. For information about additional requirements that must be met in order to pursue compensation, visit the VICP's website, and then it gives the VICP website address. So that is, we try to be brief and concise, and that's, this is our attempt at doing that, recognizing that it's a lot more information than was provided before. So I will open that up to discussion among the ACCV unless you all have questions of me before you want to proceed with your discussion.
This is Karen. Thank you for this. I really like this. And would this be standardized on all the VIS statements?
So Karen, this is Tamara. So it would be, so we are an advising body to the CDC regarding vaccine information statements. The decision of what's included in the vaccine information statement is left up to CDC, not us. We are in advising capacity.
Okay, okay. Well, I really like the way this reads. It definitely is much clearer. Thank you. Appreciate it.
This is Dino. I don't have a really strong view on this. I feel like it's a difficult question. I would definitely be interested in John Howie's thoughts. But I do have a little bit of a hesitation with it. I guess from a couple perspectives. One, just a practical one, I suppose, is that should the legislation ever be amended so that 3 years is no longer the time period, or the 2-4 for the death cases is no longer the time period, then I imagine that would just create logistical issues with having outdated VISs out there and available, which could be providing incorrect information. And actually, that may actually be a significant problem should there be an amendment. I realize there's no particular reason to believe that there would be an amendment, but amendment to the time periods under the statute. But if there were to be one, that would seem to create an issue. But I also just worry a little bit about whether, in the effort to give additional information, we might not be communicating, or not, I wouldn't say misinforming because that's way too strong, but I guess putting it in the hands of the people reading the VIS to reach their own conclusion about whether they have blown the statute of limitations or not, instead of directing them to a lawyer. It's a little bit like the notion of directing people who see commercials about pharmaceutical products to their doctor for more specific information. It would be unfortunate, for example, if someone were to read that language, gloss over the with limited exceptions point, conclude that because it's been more than 3 years, they don't have a claim, and just kind of give up, when in fact, if they had talked to a lawyer, they would have found out that they come within one of those limited exceptions. Or then I guess there's also a nuance, as I understand it, in the statute that draws a distinction between first symptom of the alleged injury, but also first manifestation of onset. So if someone had, I'm not sure if this situation can arise logically, but if someone were to have blown the 3 years, if it were a matter of the first symptom of the alleged injury, but not if it were a matter of the first manifestation of onset. I don't know, I can't really construct all the all the scenarios in which it may be a problem, but I guess I just offer that as to whether this would do more harm than good. And possibly an alternative would be instead of just saying there is a time limit to file a claim for compensation, there was some way to add something that would convey not necessarily a sense of urgency, but just a recommendation that the person pursue it as promptly as possible, or something like that. So again, those are just thoughts. I don't have a strong view, but those are just things I want to make sure we all had thought about.
Tamara, one thought, this is Cody, that I had was that there's no mention of the interval of time since administration of the vaccine. It really focuses on the interval of time between the onset of symptoms. And is that, shouldn't it include something about that interval?
So, Cody, this is Tamara, and no, the legislation is based on the onset of injury. It's not based on the date from when the vaccine was administered. It's from when the first symptom of the alleged injury or the manifestation of the first symptom.
Okay.
That's when the time frame starts, yeah.
Tamara, this is John Howie. I was the one who was kind of pushing for this originally, and I still think it's a good idea because I continue to get calls from people day after day who say, gee whiz, I just wish I had known about this deadline. When I tell them, I'm sorry, you're 6 months too late, a year too late, whatever it is. You know, originally I kind of, and this is somewhat along the lines of what Dina was saying, I kind of envisioned something shorter that says, you know, something along the lines of, you know, it could be as short as 2 years. You should, or something like that. Certainly I'm okay with the language here because it tracks the language of the statute as it relates to the statute of limitations, but it does seem like a lot of words.
So, John, this is Tamara. So you all can totally revise this as, you know, as you all want to, and this was our first attempt at presenting something to you all, but that's what this discussion is for. If, you know, ACCV members think this language is too much and want to revise it, that's totally up to you all. That's the purpose of this discussion.
Thank you for that clarification. I appreciate that.
Well, John,
is there any reason why we...
Sorry, John.
No, go ahead, Dina.
I was going to ask you, just based on your own experience interacting with claimants and perhaps discussing statutes of limitations with them, do you see a risk that this language, if they read it alone without guidance from someone like you, could confuse them or cause them to misapprehend what the timeline was?
Well, I mean, certainly, and part of the, I mean, the bigger problem is, and this has been discussed in opinion after opinion, you know, who decides what the first symptom is, and what if the first symptom isn't recognized as a symptom of the alleged injury at the time, but in hindsight it was the first symptom, and that's kind of why I come back to this more generalized, limited language that says, you know, your window could be as short as 2 years. You should talk to a lawyer or something along those lines. Putting a kind of an absolute date on it.
Yeah, and actually, I just as you were saying that, I realized I could think of another scenario in which someone could be misled to their detriment. And you know, if you envision a situation in which they knew they were still within 3 years of the first symptom, but there was an earlier manifestation of onset, and they didn't realize that they also needed to, that they would have to be within 3 years of that.
I tell you, I mean, I routinely tell people you need to get your claim filed within 3 years of the date of the vaccination, non-death claims, period, because that eliminates all of the argument about, well, what was the first sign or symptom? And that's why I kind of thought something along those lines might be clearer in terms of presenting or communicating effectively, what the deadline may be.
Yeah, maybe something like could be as early as 2 years in the case of death, or 3 years in all other cases.
I don't even know if you go that far. It could be as early as 2 years, period.
Yeah.
Consult with a lawyer.
Yeah.
So then, this is Tamara. So I guess one of the things that my first reaction with referring them to a lawyer is, I think people would say, well, I can't afford a lawyer. And so therefore, there will probably need to be language about the program, if the claim is filed on a reasonable and good faith basis, the program will pay for attorneys. So that's one of the things that I think we would need to probably include if we say consult an attorney, just to be, so people aren't apprehensive of reaching out to an attorney because they think they have to pay for it.
Well, that's a very good point.
Yeah.
Is there any reason why we can't table this discussion and maybe take it up in the work group and bounce these ideas around and come up with a more, I guess, a better understanding of what everybody would like to do?
This is Tamara, and sure, that's something that you all could decide as the full ACCV that you want to allow the work group to work on and come back and present, some other language to the full ACCV, yes.
This is Dino. That would make sense to me.
I think that's reasonable. John, this is Cody, can I ask you, how do patients go to the website that's indicated on the VIS? Does that, do people avail themselves of that opportunity, or is that wouldn't be a good place to disseminate some of this information about who would pay for the lawyer?
I think the unfortunate reality is that there's a large group of people out there that never even get a VIS when they get their vaccinations. And so I don't know that I can really answer that question. A lot of people I talk to say that they never got one. I can tell you I got my flu vaccine about 2 months ago, and I certainly didn't get one. So I don't know how many people are actually getting this document. And on top of that, how many people actually read them if they get them?
Yeah.
Cody, this is David Kim. May I comment on this, even though I'm not on the committee?
Please.
First thing is, I think in the first 3 lines or so, there may be missing commas. I'm just having a hard time grasping this within 3 years after the first symptom, or within 2 years of death, and 4 years after the first symptom of injury that resulted in death. That seems to be a kind of rough way of saying what the qualifications are. For example, if 3 years after the first symptom, 2 years of death. So if the first symptom occurred and then that resulted in death at 5 years, that does not include. Then that's not inconsistent with 4 years after the first symptom of the alleged injury that resulted in death. Meaning 3 plus 2 does not equal 4. So I may not be reading this correctly, but it seems that the placement of commas could better explain what the real intent is. I also have questions about with limited exceptions. If you state that right up front, what are these limitations? I think that's the reader would expect that right from the top. So just a couple of things related to that. I think I would want to know what the exceptions are right off the top. So one thing that that we can do is perhaps, well, and the last comment I have is a use of the term death. Now, vaccine injury could result in death, so death by definition could be considered a symptom. So maybe within 2 years of death or 4 years after the first symptom, the whole thing can be standardized by saying 3 years after the first symptom of the, or 4 years after the first symptom of the alleged injury, including death, and simplifying things that way, and not teasing out death as something that requires additional calculations of the period for which a case can be made.
So, Dr. Kim, this is Tamara, and thank you for your comments. Really appreciate it. So I guess one of the reasons why the language was initially so sort of simple and sparse before was because the program is very specific. The legislation is very specific about the time frames for filing for an injury versus the time frames for filing versus for a death. And so it's complicated, and so that's why it's listed here separately, because according to the Vaccine Act, there are different statute of limitations based on a vaccine injury, based on a death, and then there's also a separate time frame if we change the table. So there are multiple time frames, and then based on what the situation is. And then the other thing with limited exceptions, the court is the one who determines what those limited exceptions have been. And so we wouldn't want to necessarily get into that level of detail, because then you get into the issue of equitable tolling, and you have to explain what that is. So it's complicated, and that's why initially we tried to keep the language much simpler. So I think John's suggestion about the work group sort of discussing it, because there are so many nuances to this, may be probably the best approach to take, because within the work group, there can be that more detailed discussion about, and we can answer those questions to try and come up with some, some easier to understand, more appropriate language, or something that meets that can be presented to the ACCV that's less cumbersome, I guess.
I think that's a good suggestion, because as John also said, a lot of people who receive it don't read it, and so it's important to keep it as concise as possible. I think the longer this section is, the fewer people will take the time to read it. So we're trying to balance detail with sufficient information.
This is Karen. I would very much obviously like to be on this work group. I think this parallels with the communication had with the patient and the doctor, and I think if you get, as a patient, if you get a form that says, call here, but then the doctor looks at you in the eyes and says, vaccine injuries don't happen, I think this is, I think there's a lot of things that we need to talk about this issue, because it's so important. And, like John, I see parents all the time that have never had the conversation with their doctor who's treating the injuries. And I think a lot of doctors don't even know really what the table of injuries are. And so this is a huge thing. I mean, especially for the family who are paralyzed from a flu shot or whatever. I mean, coming back years later, not being able to do anything is tragic. I would very much like to be on the work group.
So do we need a motion to, I guess we need a motion. I would make a motion to have a work group to discuss all of this.
Yeah,
do you just want
I think that's
John,
fine.
This is Tamara for a point of clarification. Do you just want to have the existing work group to have this as a topic for discussion?
I think that would be best if we could do it that way, yes.
Yeah, you definitely can, yes.
Then that's my motion.
Second that.
He needs a second and then a vote.
Is Dino seconded?
Yep. All right. All
Yes.
in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
So we'll move it down the line, and then we can bring your recommendation back to the whole committee. So who will be? Do we have to decide who's going to be on that at this point?
It's the existing work group, Cody, which consists of John and Dino and Karen's on it, and then Cody, you participate too. So it would be the existing work group would take this up as a topic and bring it back to the full ACCV.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. That sounds fine. All right. So I guess that brings us to the review of the existing vaccine information sheets. Is who's going to walk us through that?
Hi, Dr. Meister. This is Suzanne Johnson de Leon from CDC.
Okay, thank you for being here.
Sure. I believe Skip's on the line too, although I don't know if he's talkable. So he's here for any questions that come up. Do you want to just go ahead and launch into it?
Yeah, why don't you just start off? I think H-flu was the first one.
Yes. I want to take a quick minute and say thanks again. As you all know from last time, this is really important to us, and we appreciate the input. And to kind of jump on the discussion that just happened, which was illuminating for me, so thanks for letting me listen in on that, and we look forward to getting suggested text down the road. We also are concerned with the people not getting the VIS and, you know, people not reading the VIS, and that's one of the reasons we're going through this update process, is to try to make them more understandable, more inviting, shorter, easier to follow, and hopefully encourage people to read them. So that is something that we have in mind as we're doing this. Next comment I want to make is I have here in front of me for my reference a compilation of your comments from the last meeting. You're welcome to mention some things again as we go through these, but you are going to see some of the same language that was on the first 8 we went through, because these were in development in the same time, at the same time. So I do have notes on the things that the committee has suggested to change on all the VISs, and they'll all be considered on these VISs as well. But again, you're welcome to bring them up as we walk through if you would like to. So, I'm sorry?
Thank you.
Thank you. So HIB is the first one here in the stack. And let's start with section 1, why get vaccinated. Again, you're going to notice that the topic area, the areas on here, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, et cetera, are exactly the same, the titles. And then when we get to the last 3 sections, they will also be exactly the same throughout the VISs, except on rotavirus. So we'll hit on that when we get to it. But section 1, HIB, any comments? And thank you to whoever's controlling the screen there. Quiet group today.
This is Karen. I have a question, so I'm just trying to read through this. So when it says about an allergic reaction, and so on this, there's no link to what the ingredients are in the vaccine, so the person can research to know if they would have an allergic reaction?
You're looking at section 3, right? Yeah. Okay. No, there's not a link to the ingredients on in the vaccine. We encourage everyone who goes to a healthcare provider to get vaccinated to make their provider aware of any severe life-threatening allergies, and that's the point at which the discussion would happen that could raise things that might be in the vaccine. We do not include links to the package inserts, no.
And is there any reason for that? I mean, if you just put like a link at the bottom, just so they, is there a reason that people can't just link to the entire insert that comes in the vaccine package so they could get other information opposed to going separately to the doctor? A lot of times when you ask for that information from the doctor, it's very difficult to get that information. Having a conversation about having an allergy is different to looking, to getting more information. I'm not saying it's just not easy to do, to get that information. And a lot of times the doctor, you really have to be persistent. And most people who are vaccine hesitant will get, refused to be seen by the doctor if you have discussions about vaccine hesitancy. So, yeah, I'm just, it'd be really nice if they could just link and get all of that information and then have that conversation with the doctor. It just kind of seems to make sense to me.
Well, there's actually several reasons we don't have those links on here. One of the reasons is the VISs have historically, and still today for the most part, been intended to be provided on paper. And having a complicated link, which is what it would be, because I don't know if you have probably researched this, the links are somewhat lengthy and somewhat complicated, and we, by policy, only link to the FDA version of the package inserts from CDC websites and what have you. So if you hand somebody the paper that has that complicated link, we're not sure it's going to be used. It takes up space, and it's a little bit confusing in some cases. Then in the case of certain vaccines, there are so many different vaccine options. There could be 10 links on this page. DTaP, Hib, they're in combination vaccines. There are several different types here. Those are a couple of the reasons that we haven't gone with putting that kind of link on here. Obviously, we have no problem with people doing all the research, and it'd be great if providers would point people wherever they want to go. Our feeling so far has been that this document is not really the right place for that kind of link.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, this is Cody. I agree. I mean, a lot of the vaccines have long chemical names, and I think it would be difficult for people to grasp. So, but the question I had for you, going back to Section 1, about why get vaccinated, and I don't know if this is necessary, but the sentence says before the Hib vaccine, Hib disease was the leading cause of bacterial meningitis among children under 5 years in the United States. It was also the most common cause of acquired mental retardation in the United States. Now, maybe you don't have to, I don't know how strongly you feel the need is to drive that point home more emphatically, but this is a terrible, terrible disease. And people don't get a sense of how bad meningitis is, I think, from reading it, and maybe that's fine, but they should understand the risk that they're running if they don't get vaccinated.
So maybe what you're suggesting is we should consider emphasizing the brain damage portion of that somewhat more because of this kind of effect?
Yeah, because, I mean, when it says meningitis is an infection of the lining of the brain and spinal cord, it can lead to brain damage and deafness. I mean, you could also say it was the main cause of acquired mental retardation before the vaccine.
All right, thank you. Other comments on Section 1? How about Section 2? This is a section where we kind of give an overview of the vaccine.
Looks fine.
Right, and of course Hib's a little complicated because of those two different schedules, but we tried to cover that in general here. Section 3, I'm sorry?
Yep, I agree. That's a problem with several of the vaccines, but I thought you handled it very well the way it's phrased.
Oh, I'll pass that along. Thank you. Section 3, Hib, of course, there aren't a whole lot of reasons to avoid Hib vaccination. It's a very, I want to say almost benign vaccine, but here they're listed. And I want to make the point again now. I know that a comment came out of the last meeting suggesting that the minor illness paragraph be considered to be moved into the bulletin section, and I do have that noted, and it will be considered when we're going through to finalize all of these. So it hasn't been ignored. It's that this was put together at the same time as that last group we looked at. Any other thoughts on Section B? Okay, could you please advance to the next page, which will have Section 4 at the top? while we're looking for that, Section 4 is about the risks of vaccine reaction. Oh, can I move it? I can move it. I'm sorry. There we go. Risks of a vaccine reaction: redness, warmth, swelling where the shot is given, fever. And then the same paragraphs in here about fainting after medical procedures, and then the chance of vaccine causing severe allergic reaction, serious injury, or death. This will look familiar. Any comments on this?
Well, the age group that usually gets him is probably not going to have those complaints, but that's fine.
Then in sections 5, 6, and 7, these are exactly the same, word for word, as on the VISs that we reviewed at the last meeting. It covers the serious problem and what to do, the injury compensation program, and again, thank you for letting me listen in on that last conversation. Just to give you a little bit of background on where our lawyers have been on this conversation in the past, their approach has generally been that anything included on the vaccine compensation website that's listed here on the VIS is included by reference. And so they've been hesitant to expand that section too much, which doesn't mean that it won't be considered, and certainly we want any input. I'm just giving you the historical background there, but we're open to, we want to make it as useful as possible to everyone, so we're open to anything that you want to send to us for consideration. Any thoughts on 5, 6, or 7? Okay. Is it all right to move on to HPV?
Yes.
Great. HPV, Section 1, why get vaccinated?
Yeah, I had written, you don't have oropharyngeal disease as one of the bullets, and that's really one of the most common types of cancer from HPV, so that's prevented, I think. So do you want to include that?
That's a good catch, and I'll tell you that in the earlier draft of this document, it was included. It actually was taken out by FDA, and the reason FDA asked us to remove it was they said that that is not an approved indication of the vaccine to prevent the oropharyngeal cancers. So I will certainly note your comment and send it back when the SMEs go back through this document, but that's the reason it's not there at the moment.
Interesting, because that's the main reason that men were included to get the HPV vaccine.
Yes. Well, you know, as you all know better than I do, FDA and ACIP sometimes aren't in agreement, and there are different recommendations. In this case, it seems that our reviewers at FDA felt pretty strongly about it, so that's why it came out.
Sure. No, that's fine.
This is Dino. Is there any thought to including, trying to speak and read at the same time, genital warts and why get vaccinated? I don't see it in there unless I'm missing it.
I'm racking my brain to remember what it was that the doctors were saying about that. Their focus in our area tends to be more on the cancers it's preventing. I don't remember if it was ever suggested to include it, but I'll certainly bring that up to genital warts versus cancer as a reason for the vaccine.
Mm-hmm. And then is this geared towards Gardasil 9? For
yes.
example, in terms, so the 90% of cancers, that's the Gardasil 9
yes.
Data, and that's fine though, right? Because Gardasil is no longer available in the United States.
Correct. HPV-1 is now the only one, the 9-valent is the only one available.
Right, okay.
Other thoughts on Section 1 on HPV? I'm going to scroll it up here for Section 2, which of course talks about the vaccine. Now I'm going to jump ahead of you just on one comment here. That second paragraph, there's a lot of discussion still going on about that as to whether it would be better to say, yes, we want everybody 26 and older to get it, or no, we don't really want everybody 26 and older to get it. Bottom line is ACIP has recommended that this is to be discussed with the doctor or the shared clinical or healthcare provider, shared clinical decision making. So the wording that's in here, if you have thoughts on it, I'm happy to hear them, and just know that there is other discussion going on about that section as well. Any thoughts on section 2?
I think it's well phrased.
Okay, great. All right, section 3, here again, these are the things to talk with the healthcare provider about. And you know, keep in mind, it's not a contraindication necessarily, it's something to bring to the provider's attention, if it's listed here. And then risks of a vaccine reaction, down in section 4. See, I think I can put them both on the screen. Any comments on sections 3 or 4?
Yeah, I have, what, on here, it doesn't say anaphylaxis on here, and I'm confused, because it's a table injury, and from that vaccine, but it doesn't talk about that. It says dizzy, but there's also convulsions after this vaccine. Is that?
Well, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's just my question.
Okay. Anaphylaxis is addressed in section 5, so it is covered.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. Thank you.
No problem. And then I'm not exactly sure what you mean by convulsion. You mean something separate from. I'm assuming you're meaning that to be separate from an anaphylactic reaction, right?
Okay. Okay, sorry. So yeah, I can't read 5 right. Okay, so I'm looking at 4. I'll wait till you get to 5. Sorry, I jumped again. I was expecting it to be under 4.
Oh, no problem.
This, you know, I do have a question about 4 and 5, I guess. Maybe this applies to all of these. Is the idea that 4 is information that the patient is supposed to know prior to going forward with the vaccination? Like, that's the enumeration of risks, assuming everything works as it should. And I realize we've heard comments to the effect that these things don't get distributed, but if the system works as it's supposed to work, the idea is 4 is what you should know before you decide to go forward with vaccination, and then 5 is information that might be of use to you after the vaccination. And I guess as I pose that question, I suppose you could, you know, some of what's in 5, I guess, is the kind of thing you'd want to know in 4. I don't know. Do you have any comment on any of my ramblings just now?
Certainly. From my perspective, the entire document is intended to be provided to the patient before they receive the vaccine. At the time of vaccination, in most cases, because that's when it would happen, assuming it does, but before they're vaccinated. So in consideration of that, anything printed here is information that we want to give the patients an opportunity to have before vaccination. Now, the years, the way VISs have kind of evolved, the latter sections are more for the take this home and hold on to it for after. But I would consider both sections 4 and section 5 important for before as well as after, because, for example, when my young child came home and had a big swollen red leg, it was nice to know that, yeah, that was probably going to happen, even after it happened, right? So I guess there's a lot of different ways to look at that, and it wasn't intended to be, here, read these 3 sections now and then read the other ones when you get home kind of thing. It's, here is some information. You get it before vaccination, take it home and refer to it as well.
Right, and I guess what I was getting hung up on is that what is described in 5 sounds like risk information in some ways, in the sense that it's alerting you to the possibility of this severe allergic reaction.
Yes, you're right.
You're right. Therefore, kind of, at least logically, one could say it should be in 4 as well, but I suppose if the whole thing is given, I mean, in light of the fact that there's no distinction in terms of what's communicated to the patient about things to look at before vaccination versus after, and I suppose it's kind of an academic question as to whether something within 5 ought also to be within 4. So in the end, I suppose it doesn't really make a difference in terms of the extent to which the patient is informed before making a decision to go forward.
Oh, your point makes some sense, and I have noted it down here, especially when I'm looking at it now. The page flips there at the end of 4. So somebody just looked at the front of it. So it's definitely something worth considering. So I'll take that forward. Thank you.
Okay.
The
All
idea
right,
of including it here too. Other thoughts on section 4 before I scroll it on over?
I suspect you've discussed the issue of asking the patient to wait for 15 minutes after the injection, and because that's not suggested in every case, you decided not to put it in here.
Yes, I actually had a conversation about that with the person who wrote that part of the recommendations for ACIP not too long ago, and it's kind of a, this might be something worth considering, but we don't necessarily recommend it in all cases like you were saying. And that's one of those that's more of a provider decision to recommend that the patient stay. That's how we're looking at it. So that's kind of why it's not included. We can certainly revisit that if anyone feels that that would be useful and not extra information that just makes it longer. But yes, there's not really a hard and fast reason it's not in here, other than that it doesn't always apply and it might better come from the provider. Is our thought process.
Yep, I'm comfortable with that. I don't think you need to revisit it if you've discussed it.
This is Karen again. I just want to say for the record, I'm still really concerned that all the risks are under risks. And didn't there used to be a place that said people who should not receive the vaccine somewhere? Did I miss that?
The section 3 that now is talk with your healthcare provider used to list people who should not receive the vaccine. However, we wanted to expand that to also include things like precautions, and it got tricky because it looked like we were telling people who didn't actually have a contraindication that they should not receive the vaccine. So instead, the way we've approached it over the last few years is to group them all in together, contraindications, precautions, and anything that the provider might need to know in helping to make the determination about vaccination, and say, instead of not getting the vaccine, talk with your provider about these things.
And I just have to add to that in California, children from 12 to 18 can get this vaccination without their parents' permission, and it often happens at school. And so when children are lined up and receiving a vaccination at school, and they're responsible for themselves, I have a huge concern about that. I mean, I think that, like you said, I think it was you that said when your child came home and there was swelling on the leg, but if a parent didn't even know that the child was getting vaccinated at school, and the child made this decision based on having this conversation with their healthcare provider, but it's a nurse, as she's lining up a bunch of people to get vaccines, this vaccine has serious side effects, and it's injured, a large amount of people, and I think it's just very concerning.
I think that might be a little out of the scope of the VIS, since VIS is not an informed consent document, and I have to tell you, I don't feel qualified to comment on how California is doing vaccination, but I hear what you're saying. Others might have comments.
Well, I mean, I would only point out that the HPV vaccine is one of the safest vaccines we have, and 2 recent studies, one from the CDC and one from one of the other programs, shows that it's extremely safe. And so I'm not quite sure what you're talking about when you say this is a dangerous vaccine.
Well, I'm referring to VAERS, the reports on VAERS, and
yes.
Yeah, for the record, I just totally disagree with that. But the reports that are made to VAERS, I think there was like 35,000 injuries reported. Yeah, I think that there's numerous reports, but that's for the record for me. I totally disagree with that statement.
Well, there was a recent update that you might want to look at. It's in Pediatrics this month on a report from VAERS on the HPV vaccine, and there weren't any issues. Just so you're aware.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
So on HPV, any comments on 5, 6, or 7, which again are the exact same as on the last one? Are we good to move on to the next VIS? Hearing none, I'm going to scroll down. Can you all see that image? I can't.
I'm seeing pneumococcal. Is that what we're supposed to be looking at?
Okay. On my end, it's a big gray box, but if you can see it, I'll look at the one I've got printed out here. Okay, so pneumococcal conjugate vaccine, section 1, why get vaccinated? I should mention there's another VIS, and it hasn't come before your committee because it is not on the injury table, so it's treated a little bit differently in its review process. But it's section 1 is exactly the same for PPSV, the polysaccharide vaccine. Its section 1 is exactly the same, and any changes we make to this one would also be made on that one and vice versa. Any comments on section? Yes.
Yeah, this is Cody. I think there's a typo. That's not what you're looking for. But it says in section 1, third paragraph, it says besides pneumonia, pneumococcal. I don't think there's such a word as besides. It's supposed to be just beside pneumonia, I think.
Okay.
Are you sure about that? That's a word, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I didn't look it up. I don't know.
All right, I'm going to consult dictionary.com here.
All right.
So ask our crack writer editors and have a good laugh if it turns out that it's wrong. So thank you. We'll fix it if it is, but thank you for pointing that out. Other thoughts on section 1? Okay, I'm going to kind of guess where section 2 might be here. Hopefully it's showing up. No, wait, it's threads. So the first half of it, this is talking about the vaccine. Now, you know, the recommendations for PCV 13 from ACIP just recently changed, and now the dose at 65 or older is based on shared clinical decision making. So that's reflected here in the last paragraph of section 2. The recommendations for infants and young children have not changed, nor have those for people 2 years and older with certain medical conditions. Any comments on section 2?
Good.
Okay, thank you. Section 3, this is the talk with your healthcare provider. And you'll notice this one, it's a little wordier than on some of the other ones because it was really important to our subject matter experts that we make the point about bad reactions to vaccines containing diphtheria toxoid or to previous versions of pneumococcal conjugate vaccine needing to be brought to the attention of the provider. Comments on section 3? Okay. Section 4, and here again, if you notice that I'm not capturing the right thing on the screen, please let me know. I'm seeing kind of a blank screen except for the outline. Risks of a vaccine reaction is listed here. And here again, you'll notice there's a paragraph in here that's different from some of the other ones, which talks about co-administration of PCV 13 and inactivated influenza vaccine, that second paragraph. Any comments on section 4? Then 5, 6, and 7 are exactly the same as on the other VISs.
This is John Howie. I just had a quick question. So is there just no Section 6 on the PPSV?
Correct. That's right.
Gotcha.
There are a few other ones in case you haven't been to the VIS main page lately. We have, for example, VIS is for typhoid, for adenovirus, for anthrax, for rabies. None of those are on the injury table. So they're treated slightly differently, but that's the difference in content, yes, that you've just identified. That number 6 is missing, and the code reference at the bottom of the page is missing because it's not required by regulation to have VISs for those vaccines. We just do it as a service.
Thank you.
Any other comments on this pneumococcal VIS? All right, I'll scroll on to polio. Polio, Section 1 is somewhat long, and here it is. Any comments on Section 1? Now, of course, since oral polio vaccine is no longer available in the U.S., this one used to say inactivated polio vaccine at the top of it back a revision or two ago. Now it doesn't, because the only one available in the U.S. is the inactivated vaccine. Any comments on Section 1? Or Section, which is there on the right-hand side? Or how about Section 3? This is another one of those vaccines where there just aren't very many contraindications or precautions for it. It does continue on to the next page, however, so let me see. Hopefully there you can see both sections of Section 3. Any comments? Okay. So here's Section 4, risks of vaccine reaction. Here again, there's just not a lot associated with this vaccine. And then Sections 5, 6, and 7 are exactly the same. Any comments at all on polio?
This is Karen again. So I'm looking under the risks. So on the table it says anaphylaxis, but I don't see that on a serious problem. Obviously it would be a quick serious problem, but it doesn't say that on the risks of a vaccine reaction either, does it?
Oh, hold on a minute. Let me go back and see. Anaphylaxis is covered in Section 5. If you see signs of virologic reaction, hive, swelling of the face, and throat, difficulty breathing, fast heartbeat, that section.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Anaphylaxis is one of those words that we're trying to avoid using on the VIS because it's so big, but the concept is covered there. Are there thoughts on the polio VIS?
This is Dino. I gather the polio vaccine that's currently in use does not pose any risk of infecting people around the vaccinee?
Correct. The vaccine-associated paralytic polio, I think is what you're getting at, the VAP, it was associated with the oral polio vaccine, but that is not a risk from the inactivated injectable vaccine.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to scroll. Are you all seeing rotavirus on your screen?
Yes.
All right, so rotavirus, as you all know, is a little bit different from some of the other vaccines. It's the oral vaccine, it's a live virus vaccine, and it has been associated, at least at some level, with intussusception, which is why when we get to Section 5, yes, Section 5, it's a little bit different. But let's start with Section 1. If you have any comments, please share. And of course, rotavirus vaccine is only for infants. That's why it doesn't talk about older children or adults. And there's Section 2 about the rotavirus vaccine. and this, like Hib, depending on the brand that is used, there's different numbers of doses recommended. There's a paragraph about porcine circle virus. Our subject matter experts feel very, very strongly that this needs to be left on the VIS regardless of the really heavy URL. There's really no negotiating that out of here. I wish there was a better way to get directly to this information, at the minimum of shorter URL, or some other way to summarize this. If there are thoughts on good ways to do that, I'd appreciate your thoughts. But for now, that is why this section is in here.
Yeah, this is Cody. I had circled it because it's really a non-issue, and as it correctly states, it doesn't infect people. So, and I'm not sure it's a viable virus. Wasn't it by hybridization assays they picked it up? So I'm curious as to why the SME felt so strongly about leaving it in.
I don't have a good answer for you. I can just tell you there were many, many back and forth discussions on it, and you feel quite strongly. But I will, on your comments, I appreciate that, and ask if they want to look at it again.
Yep, I would have voted to take it out.
Could one of you explain that issue?
Well, Suzanne, do you want to take that?
Go ahead.
Well, a few years ago, my understanding is people started doing new hybridization assays on the vaccine and found that there was nucleic acid from the circle virus, which is a pig virus, that had contaminated the vaccine, and there was obviously great and appropriately consternation. Then it was found in the other rotavirus vaccine as well, and studies were done, and it simply doesn't infect humans, and so we're exposed to this in a variety of different meat sources, is my understanding. So I'm sure there are other so-called adventitious viruses, Dino, that are that may be in vaccines that we don't know about, and so I think it becomes a question of how far do you go in terms of full disclosure, but yet how do you concentrate the discussion into issues that are relevant. This is simply not a relevant issue regarding safety in my mind. So that's kind of the way I look at it.
Right.
Suzanne, do you have anything to add?
No, thank you very much. That was a better explanation than I would have given.
It seems a little weird to bring it up only to say it's not an issue.
Yep.
Because if it's not an issue, why bring it up at all? But I see the countervailing argument that at least you're highlighting it or noting it.
There was a period of time when there was a lot of news about it, and there were a lot of questions about it, and that may have been the origin of when it was first put on the VIS, because it has been on the rotavirus VIS in some form or another for a very long time. And it might be that our SMEs are just not ready to say, okay, the storm has passed, and they're trying to avoid, to address it head on before it even is asked. That's a theory on my part, but for what that's worth.
Right.
Who is the SME now for rotavirus? Do you know?
The primary person I'm working with is Dr. Cortese, Margaret Cortese.
Mm-hmm.
And Umesh Parshar, I don't believe he's here right now. I think he's overseas at the present time, so I've been working with her. Yeah. Any other thoughts on section 2? All right, section 3 is split between the columns. So the first part of it is down here on the left. And of course, this one has a few more things to talk with your provider about because it is a live virus. Let me scroll back up so you can see the other side there on the right. Any comments on section 3? And then section 4. Intussusception is highlighted not because it happens frequently, but because it is so dangerous if it does happen, and because it's happening to an infant who can't tell us what's going on. So that's why it's highlighted. We want to get them care immediately if it was to happen.
So this is John Howie, and you just kind of hit the nail on the head in terms of the question I was going to ask. You've got a bullet point here saying irritability or mild or temporary diarrhea or vomiting can happen after rotavirus vaccine. I'm sorry, I heard an echo. But, you know, the problem is intussusception is a life-threatening illness. And I've had, I don't see a lot of intussusception cases, but I've certainly had a handful of families that have said, gee whiz, you know, the child was having some diarrhea and we didn't think anything of it. And it just seems like you're tempering the severity of a potential problem with intussusception by saying, if your child's having some diarrhea, don't worry about it, if that makes sense.
It does. On the other hand, if a child has mild diarrhea after rotavirus, do you want them all coming back to your office?
Not necessarily, but I certainly want them to understand that irritability or mild temporary irritability or mild diarrhea or vomiting can be a first sign or symptom of a life-threatening condition called intussusception, which, you know, the clock is ticking on, tied to tissue, so to speak.
Okay. So
I'm not sure how I would reword it. I mean, I understand the balance that you're trying to get there, but you know, I just, the first thing I see is, hey, if your kid's having diarrhea or vomiting, don't worry, they could be fine. But on the other hand, it could be intussusception, which if it is, your kid could die.
Got it. That's what you're saying. So consider including some kind of lead in to the intussusception or some kind of additional detail to say how you could recognize the onset of intussusception and that it could be. So. Okay.
I'm sorry.
Maybe like a something within 4 that does something like see also section 5 or something.
Okay, that's an idea. I'm writing these down. Thank you. Okay, other thoughts?
This is Karen. Can I, do you have any stats on how often this happens in the U.S.?
I don't know if I have a stat. I have, well, you can see here the additional risk information. I don't have in front of me numbers on like population level risk. I don't know if anyone else might have that information. Regardless of vaccination, I mean. No. You look that up, certainly, to know. Is that what you're asking, when it happens in the general population, or are you asking about added risk from the vaccine?
No, I was just asking how often the
in
virus
general
in the U.S., yeah.
Yeah, okay. No, I'm sorry, I don't have those in front of me. I can certainly look them up.
I can look them up. Okay, thank you.
Okay. It isn't very common, I'll say it that way. But like I said, I'd have to look them up to give you that info.
I can just say I addressed all of these issues in a recent editorial in JAMA that I think was sent around to everybody, and it goes through all of these risks and probabilities, and so that may be helpful for you, Karen.
Okay, thank you.
Other thoughts on section 4? Okay, I'm going to scroll on down to the next page, the back of the page, which has Number 5, number 6, and number 7. I've mentioned a couple of times. Number 5 is different from the other vaccines, and the major difference here is that first paragraph, which talks about intussusception. And this is, I think, what one of you was getting at when you suggested maybe putting in a comment about seeing Section 5 into Section 4, because there's quite a bit more detail here on the side so 4. Any thoughts on Section 5, or 6 or 7? 7 are exactly the same as on the other VISs. Still writing those interception notes here. Okay. Any other comments at all on rotavirus VIS? Hearing none. So I have 2 more VISs left. Now these are in a different format. So these are the same words, at least in sections 5, 6, and 7, but we haven't laid them out yet. We're a little earlier in the process. I just didn't want to miss this opportunity to bring them to you now since the text was cleared. So that's why they look different. When they're all laid out, they're going to be in the same format. They're going to have the same little headers and all of that kind of thing. But in the meantime, here you can see the wording for Section 1 for DTAP. I think that's what you're seeing. Is that what you're seeing?
It is, yes.
Yes.
Great. Any comments on Section 1 on DTAP? I should also mention that this one will probably not come out. It won't be completely laid out and released even as an interim until sometime at the end of January when the new recommendations for Tdap become official. And the reason for that is we want the text in the first section to kind of match. So to be able to finalize all of the ones that include diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis at the same time is kind of our goal. So that's the timing issue here with why this isn't finished being laid out yet. And those, by the way, I don't have TD or Tdap for you today. I'm hoping to bring them to you in March if there's time available for us on the agenda, along with the multi-pediatric VIS, which will round out the total group. We will have been through all of them once we get through those 3. Any comments on Section 1? Here's Section 2, at least the first half of it. Let's see.
Yeah, I think there's a typo here.
Okay.
Adults on the second line in Section 2 should be plural.
Adults on the section line. Oh, yes. Good catch. Thank you very much. I may have scrolled too far. Hopefully you can see it there. Thank you. Good catch. Then, someone speaking? No? Okay, Section 3, I hope it's visible on your screen at this point. These are the things to bring to your healthcare providers' attention. Of course, DTAP is one of those that has more reactions than some of the other vaccines, and there are more things that should be brought to the provider's attention, so the list is a little bit longer. Any comments on this?
There's a little bit of a difference in terms of Guillain-Barré syndrome, GBS, as if you're down to that level. I mean, usually the VIS says within 6 weeks, GBS within 6 weeks of vaccine administration, and here it says, has ever had GBS?
Yes, that's a good catch. And what we're trying to do is prompt anything that could be of importance in the discussion with the provider. We could go back to saying within 6 weeks, or we could rely on somebody saying, well, you know, my child had this happen, and then think through when it happened or investigate when it happened to see if it actually is a precaution to vaccination or not. Or do you think it would be better to add the within 6 weeks here on the document? What are your thoughts? Anyone's thoughts?
Yep. I mean, my thought is to standardize all the VIS as much as possible, and the risk, you know, first of all, GBS in children is extremely rare, and there's no, I don't think of a pertussis-containing vaccine as any more likely to be associated with GBS than anything else. So I would standardize it, but I understand what you're saying.
Thank you. Anybody else have thoughts on this or anything else in section 3? Okay, I'm going to scroll down a little, and I hope that you can see section 4 there, risks of a reaction, and then just because I think it will all fit, there's also section 5. Here again, 5, 6, and 7 are exactly the same as all of the other VISs except rotavirus. So section 4, any comments? Or section 5?
Do you want to, just reading the second bullet in 4, it says, rarely the vaccine is followed by swelling of the entire extremity, especially after their 4th. I mean, this has no medical consequence, and it resolves, and even if they've had it after the 4th dose, they should get their 5th dose. Could you qualify that by saying self-resolving or time-limited swelling?
Okay. Self-resolving or time-limiting. Okay. Time-limited, yes. Okay, I'll take that back. That makes sense. Of course, what we're trying to get to is kind of an R2's reaction without saying R2's reaction to
yes.
the concept. Okay, thank you. Other thoughts on that or anything else in section 4? Can you still see section 4? I may have rolled you past section 4. There you go. Hearing none, 5, 6, and 7 are, again, exactly the same as on the other VISs. And when laid out, this one will look like the rest of them. Any other comments on DTAP?
Did the,
okay.
Whoops, can I ask just one? So the subject matter expert wanted to leave in that last bullet, very rarely permanent brain damage may happen after DTAP?
Yes, that one has been the subject of a lot of discussion over the years. And I'm trying to remember what we said on this last iteration. I'd have to go back and pull notes, but the bottom line is, yes, it was left in as it went through clearance. I can research it more if you want me to get more background on why.
That's fine. But most people don't think there's an association with the acellular vaccine, but there are much smarter people than me who've thought about this, so that's fine.
I don't know about that, but okay, thank you. All right. I think that you will have now our last VIS of the day, and thank you so much for bearing with me on all of these. It's really, really helpful and really important. Hepatitis vaccine. Again, this one is in draft form, hasn't been laid out yet. There is a hepatitis A ACIP statement coming out at some point in the not distant future, and I suspect that we'll probably end up timing this VIS, assuming we get through all of the reviews in time, to coincide or come right after that document is published. So section 1, information about hepatitis A. Any comments?
Section 1, yep, I would say in the second paragraph it says most children less than 6 years of age do not have symptoms but are still contagious or still transmit the virus to contacts.
Can still spread the disease. How about that?
Yeah, that's better. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Other thoughts on section 1?
Just on that sentence, maybe that Cody was just mentioning.
Yes.
Maybe it should say most children with hepatitis A.
Oh, good
Most
point.
children less than 6 years of age with hepatitis A.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Actually, Cody, I'm sorry, just one thing. In light of the very next paragraph.
Yeah, no, I did see that, but I think that's the real reason we vaccinate 6-year-old children, children starting in the first year of life, because they spread it to adults and they have no symptoms. So, right. but adults can get it too and not have symptoms. So I guess I was trying to emphasize that that's the reason we vaccinate children. But you're right, I mean, maybe it's redundant.
We'll look at the whole thing, those paragraphs, and I know the SMEs will be looking at it again as they're finishing up the ACIP statement. So it could be that somebody comes up with a good way to kind of combine them but still emphasize the children part. And I've noted your comments. I see what you were saying. Thank you. I'm going to scroll it down so we can see section 2. So section 2 talks about the vaccine, and it actually goes over to the next page. So
why does it say children usually need 2 doses? Hello? Whoops.
We're still here, Cody. I'm not saying.
Not sure if we're still connected.
Cody?
This is Dina. I'm
Yes.
still connected. Sounds like Tamara is too.
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear us, Cody?
Okay. Yep, I can hear.
Okay, all right. I'm not sure what happened. Is Suzanne still there?
Suzanne?
Cody's comment is so powerful that.
Suzanne? I'm sorry. Are you muted, Suzanne?
She got sick of hearing from me.
Is Skip there?
Hi, this is Skip. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes. So Skip, yeah, because not sure what happened with Suzanne.
I don't know what happened to her either. And yeah, I heard the question, and I'm not quite sure how that got in there. I'm checking quickly the schedule to see if there are situations where a child might not get 2 doses, and I don't see anything offhand.
Yeah, I don't think there is. I mean, it is true that...
We'll double check that at least.
Okay.
So Skip, you want to pick up where she left off?
Sure. Wait, I was checking to see if there's a... No, I don't see any situation where a child would get more than 2 doses either. Okay. So we were on section 2, correct?
Yes.
Okay, anything else on section 2? Okay, we can move on to section 3 then. Same issue, the way to get to contraindications and precautions by having the patient talk to the provider about certain things. Okay, if nothing for section 3, section 4. Again, hepatitis A is not a very risky vaccine. And incidentally, when in section 4, when you talk about a severe allergic reaction, basically that's anaphylaxis, even though we don't mention it by name. So technically it's covered under both section 4 and section 5. Okay, and then
5, 6, and 7, again, are identical with all the other VISs.
Looks good.
Okay. So if there are no other comments, I'm sorry we lost Suzanne, but I will thank her on your behalf for her excellent job. And thank you all for your comments, as usual.
And thank you for coming in.
Thank you, Skip and Suzanne, for walking us through these. They're hard to get.
Thank you for your input. This has been a marathon session, but thanks.
Okay. So I guess, Tamara and Annie, does that brings us pretty much to the end?
Yes, and then at this point, it would be the request for public comment, and then after that, future agenda items.
Can I ask one last question? I don't know if now is time before the public comment comes in, but I was curious about the next meeting, and I know that the board is, do we have any names, or do you have people that are going to be filling the open positions for March? And I think that I was told we were going to meet in person, and I don't know if you know if that's a for sure, or might that change by March?
So Suzanne, this is Tamara. So we are in the process of appointing new members. We expect that the meeting in March will be in person, but we can't say for sure because it depends on new members being appointed and just possibly other issues. So, but yes, we're working to appoint new members. The plan is to have the March meeting in person, but we can't say for sure if that's the case because we have to just sort of wait and see.
Oh, okay. 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 Thank you.
Okay. Are we ready for public comment?
Yes, and the operator can open the line for public comment.
As a reminder, if you'd like to make a public comment, please press star 1 and record your name clearly. One moment, please, for the first comment. Teresa Rangam, your line is open.
Thank you. Good afternoon. This is Teresa Rangam again. I'm the Executive Director for the National Vaccine Information Center. I just wanted to make a few comments. Today's presentation by Chief Special Master on the pre-assignment review is encouraging in that theoretically it could expedite cases and assist with backlog. However, as there's no equitable tolling allowed within the vaccine entry compensation program, and PAR is not required, this pilot program isn't required, our concern would be in the overall picture on the readiness of claims to go forward. It's our understanding from comments made in previous ACCV meetings that due to a lack of awareness around the VICP program, that there are petitions filed with little paperwork as petitioners are finding out about the program and filing late in the game, and attorneys are filing petitions in good faith. NVIC, like Commissioner Howie, receives many calls by those who believe they have been injured by vaccines, and we have to tell them, the majority of these people, that the statute of limitations has passed and that they can't file a claim. This raises the question of how will this program be promoted for better awareness so that when claims are filed, that there is adequate time to gather all the records needed so that claims can go forward expeditiously. Previous comments to the Commission in this regard is that some attorneys are filing in good faith with few records as the clock is running out on their client and prevents the gathering of records in advance. So I'm just wondering how this pilot program might account for that concern. We also appreciate the concessions are on the rise due to additions to the vaccine entry table. This fact brings to light another long-standing request by MVIC, which is what is being done to close the vaccine safety research gaps noted by the Institute of Medicine, many of which are based on actually various reports, and basically a review of medical literature was done and was found largely inadequate and prevented the IOM from making causality statements. Closing these gaps would meet the intent of the law of settling claims quickly, ensure that the public is using the safest vaccines possible, and there would be a more expeditious process in compensating claims. With regard to 2020, the 2020 National Vaccine Plan Goal number 2 of vaccine safety, the plan doesn't addressing the closure of these acknowledged gaps, but rather continues to focus on vaccine innovation and development. The same is true of Healthy People 2030 goals. There's also a lack of privacy and permission opportunities given to consumers with regard to participating in immunization information systems. This is used for other purposes as data. Sensitive data is being used for other purposes without explicit consent of the consumer. This raises serious privacy concerns at a state level where these systems are created. These concerns are not being addressed well and are at times contrary to the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act as it relates to vaccine information collected by schools. The majority of these IIS systems are opt-out or mandatory in participation. In Alaska, for example, all individuals, whether they're children or adults, are mandated to participate in this system with no opt-out. That brings to mind that health information exchanges are already collecting this information, and healthcare providers are already having conversations about vaccination with their patients. So these privacy concerns with regard to medical decisions should be decided by consumers and not the government. We also appreciate Dr. Meissner's comment relating to a breakdown of compensation by alleged injury. This is a longstanding request by MVIC. The public deserves to understand what alleged injuries are being compensated and at what level, as this information would also provide guidance on the type of research that is needed to understand the mechanisms of vaccine injury. This data is being gathered, but it's not being published meaningfully to the ACCV or the public. We again renew the request that more meaningful data be presented to the public. With regard to the SIDS case and the reversal of compensation, we question why the Department of Justice would seek to overturn compensation decided by the special masters, given that the original intent of this law was to provide generous no-fault compensation. MVIC helped draft and worked with Congress to pass the law, so we understand the intent of the law. Today, the majority of claims are off-table claims in the face of significant vaccine safety deficits identified by the Institute of Medicine. To reverse compensation in this manner seems unnecessarily aggressive and adversarial. We also note that the majority of ACCV meetings are no longer face-to-face. We believe that's counterproductive to the commissioners creating a positive synergy for working together. We note that the ACIP and the Nvac meet face-to-face for every meeting. Surely the ACCV's charges is of equal importance, and they should be allowed that dedicated working time together. With regard to VIS language proposed around the statute of limitation, the proposed language seems very good, and vaccine information desired by the consumer by federal reports that ACCV has previously reviewed suggests that people want more detailed information with regard to vaccine risks and the VICP program, and that by law, under the 1986 Act, there's no reason not to add this information. The length of the current VIS is an arbitrary one-page front and back. It used to be much longer, and there is documented support from a consumer stance that it's desired and would not affect vaccine decision-making in terms of whether or not a person would vaccinate. Specific to the HPV VIS, there was no information on there on the fact that over 90% of the population resolves this virus without any intervention or complication. That was by a congressional report made by the CDC. And you have similar information on the polio VIS stating that polio largely resolves without complication in the majority of cases. So I would suggest standardizing that across VISs where that's true, offer information on the disease, how often it occurs in the population, severity and frequency of complications from the disease. That was originally in the law, and there's nothing preventing it continuing to appear on the VIS. With regard to rotavirus, I think the reason the contamination piece stays in is it's a matter of legality. It's supposed to stay in even though it appears that it's not causing a problem for humans. I do believe that the language with regard to intussusception is too soft. It is life-threatening, and would agree with Commissioner Howey that it needs to be more apparent that if there is diarrhea going on in the child, it may be a sign that the parent needs to weigh more heavily and get to their doctor on. It's better to be safe than sorry. And since it was pointed out that the infants can't talk and tell us how severe or what they're feeling, and that was the whole reason for putting intussusception in there, I would think clear language in that regard is a better idea. With regard to DTaP, there's no mention of the waning of the pertussis portion, and that the incidence of disease right now is in the fully vaccinated the majority of the time. I would think that that's something that should appear on the VIS in terms of something about the vaccine and its effectiveness. And while overall standardization may be, a desirable thing for the VIS, not all vaccines are the same, and neither are their risks. So where distinctions should be made, I would support that. The risks from vaccine to vaccine are different. So if there are distinctions that need to be made, they should be made. They shouldn't. Thank you. We appreciate the opportunity to provide public comment today.
Okay. Thank you for those comments. And I think that brings us pretty close to the end here. Are there any additional subjects that people would like to propose for future discussion on the next agenda? Okay, hearing none. I think that brings us to closure. Tamara, any closing comments from yourself?
No, I want to thank everyone for participating, and I hope everybody has a great rest of the day.
Okay, thanks very much. It was a very interesting meeting, and I thank everyone too. Goodbye. Have a good holiday.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank y'all very much.
Thank you for your participation in today's conference. Please disconnect at this time.